Okay, guys, Granadas Workshop will be up very shortly. My guest tonight will be Neil Sanders. Unfortunately, his internet parked in, and we're gonna have to call him on his phone. So, give us a few minutes, and we should certainly be up and running. I really appreciate you guys tuning in. I really think you'll enjoy Neil Sanders, and he may well break some of your illusions of what's going on in this construct. But I really, really do advise that you tune in and listen to this, guys. Neil really has some really, really good information, and he was one of the people that I listened to as I was waking up, and he brought a lot of things to my attention. So stay tuned, folks, and as I say, in the next wee while we shall have Neil Sanders up and running. So back soon, guys. I appreciate you being here. Welcome back to Awake Radio, folks. I have my guest here, Neil Sanders. As I said to you before, I think you're really in for an interesting show, guys. Neil will open your eyes in many areas. And as I've already previously said to Neil, he was part of my awakening. I would like to welcome Neil Sanders. Welcome to Awake Radio, my friend.
Hello, Steve. How are you? Thank you very much for having me on. It's a pleasure.
Okay, I've just noticed that you're flat out sound there, wise, so I'm just reducing your volume. Okay, many thanks for coming on the show. I really appreciate your work, and Neil's done many things, talks all over the country, radio shows, been on Rich Planet and so on. Would you like to give out your website?
Yeah, certainly. My website is www.neilsandersmindcontrol.com, and if anyone wants to go on there, there's a video section that's got sort of previous talks and a few YouTube bits and bobs and a few live presentations and stuff. And also, I've written just before Christmas, I published 2 books called Your Thoughts Are Not Your Own, and Volume 1 and Volume 2, and they detail mind control. The first one's nuts and bolts, sort of MK Ultra, Manchurian candidates, experiments with drugs and hypnosis, talking about school shootings, and then it goes on to talk about serial killers and the Phoenix program and certain things like that. And the second one is really more to do with social control, elements that are used to sort of promote conformity, coercion in advertising, and then how the entertainment industry, the music industry, the film industry, the news media are all sort of co-optive, coercive, mind control subjects. And then finally it sort of winds up talking about the 60s music and the LSD explosion. And my contention is that essentially the whole thing was a one large military industrial Tavistock / Frankfurt School / CIA mind control experiment.
Yeah, I mean, that's quite a lot to take in. Well, most people, when you start talking in mind control, which I think is part of the conditioning we have, is immediately they go, screwball, you're a screwball.
Well, I mean, quite. I mean, that's one of the most sort of successful mind control techniques, is that this sort of milieu is considered in the realm of science fiction. Like, where most people have heard of mind control is either in the Manchurian Candidate films, or even in sort of silly films like comedies, like Zoolander. There's a mind control in that, or Naked Gun. They use mind control in that, and so it's often sort of reduced to the level of science fiction. But I mean, that's part of the point of things like Hollywood and things like the media and the news, is to mock this sort of thing, is to actually, put it in a perspective where it feels shameful to actually speak about this in public. But these are techniques that are used against it. And immediately, I mean, I'm probably skipping ahead of it here, but there's an organisation in America called the False Memory Syndrome Foundation, and what they sort of do is they basically come into areas where there's been satanic ritual abuse, or people complaining about mind control or sexual abuse through state institutions like the Presidio or the McMartin School or various sort of social services entities like that. And what the False Memory Syndrome Foundation does is it basically interviews all the children or all the witnesses and says, no, these are false memories. These have been implanted by your therapist. And this is actually sort of quite prevalent in popular culture. There's been books written about it, and people are very wary of terrible hypnotists putting false memories of abuse in your head. About 5 minutes worth of research into the False Memory Syndrome Foundation reveals that Martin Orne, who was an MK Ultra doctor that did experiments whereby he got people to pick up poisonous snakes, throw acid into the faces of passers-by, or essentially commit acts that would have resulted in their death if they weren't in experimental circumstances. He was one of the guys that was majorly involved in the foundation. Also, it was Lewis Jolly on Jolly West. He was an MK Ultra doctor that basically studied the hippie. He famously killed an elephant. It was an overdose of LSD. That was one of his high points. And he was involved in a Centre for Violence Reduction. Essentially what he wanted to do was study the brains of criminals and put implants into their head, try and control behaviour, and then with the view to implementing this on a mass social scale, so that people could be controlled and stop them from being involved in crime. Pamela Frade and her husband were two other people that were involved in the False Memory Syndrome Foundation. Their daughter accused both of them of paedophilia, continued, sustained, often satanic ritual abuse against them, and her accusations have been sustained. Ralph Underweger, who was also one of the chief psychiatrists in there, was forced to be kicked out of it because he continued to go in Dutch magazines like Pijdeker and advocate that sexual abuse of children was not harmful, that rape was actually beneficial to women, and that he didn't know of a single child abuse victim that didn't find their incident ultimately beneficial. So there's a whole series of CIA mind-controlled doctors, paedophiles, and the other one was Shirley and Paul Eberly. They basically wrote a book that was promoting this foundation, and it was also sort of disavowing the McMartin preschool trial case, the Jeffrey McDonald case, and various other incidents of satanic ritual abuse that were connected to MK Ultra. Essentially, again, same thing. Their children accused them of being paedophiles, and they had a criminal record for. They put out a magazine, I think it was called Fist, but I could be wrong about that. And essentially, that was full of lurid stories, preteen sex stories, stories about, incest and that sort of thing. So this is what's so crazy about the whole thing. There is this facade that this whole thing doesn't exist, but more often than not, the people that are actually telling you that it doesn't exist are the people that are actually perpetrating it themselves.
Yeah. I certainly think there is evidence of it does exist. There's no doubt of that.
Oh, in mind control, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, MK Ultra is an admitted fact. And under MK Ultra, essentially, they were able to implant memories, they were able to wipe people's memories, they were able to sort of effectively provide truth serums or hypnotic techniques to withdraw information from people. They were able to gain complete control of a person's actions and emotions. They were able to implant thoughts. They were able to electronically at a distance kill people, alter their mood, and actually, again, physically control them with electromagnetic waves, extremely low frequency waves, and all sorts of different elements like that. I mean, the MK Ultra that's been sort of acknowledged to be a fact is in the realm of personal mind control, espionage, interrogation aids, torture, that sort of thing. I mean, certain manuals that are still in use today, officially not, but they are things like QBARC and psychological operations in warfare. These are documents that are basically available, and these are CIA manuals that are used for basically training Contras or rebel forces when we're going into another country in order to a proxy war. So in places like Nicaragua and stuff like that, these documents were used, and the interrogation techniques that were taken directly from the MK Ultra files, which they're purposely about breaking down the psyche of a person, making them more malleable, and extracting information. And essentially, they're torture devices. The other things that these documents did was a sort of mass social mind control thing, where you're training your army to be A, feared, and B, completely ruthless. And these involve techniques like encouraging beheading and dismemberment of anybody that basically stands against you. And the rebels were trained getting them to tear the throats out of dogs with their own teeth and twist the heads off rabbits and things like this. And these documents do exist. It's just, and they're all in the public domain as well. It just goes to show how very strong that the concepts that are put around are.
Yeah. I mean, I'm assuming that there is many levels of mind control. One to the simple conditioning maybe from the TV to military style, fully blown Manchurian candidate thing.
Absolutely, but I mean, even the sort of social control things, elements like television, you'd be surprised how connected they are to the military-industrial complex. I mean, the principal concept is something called either the manufacture or the engineering of consent, depending on which school of thought you go through. The engineering of consent is Edward Bernays. He was the author of Propaganda. He was connected to Crew House and Tavistock and places like this. And Walter Lippmann was an American intellectual who talks about the manufacture of consent. And essentially it's the same thing. What it is it's the prescribing of norms. It's the prescribing of what is social roles, what is the accepted way to behave in a situation, and how people perceive the world generally. Like, I mean, a very, very simple explanation of this is like the construct of an enemy during wartime, for example. People have to understand that the beastly Hun or whatever is inhuman, and so you condition that through propaganda in the media, propaganda in the street, and then sort of less sort of obvious things like opinion pieces in magazines and stuff like that, you know, vocal figureheads and social critics and stuff like that, opinions and polls and utilizing every aspect of the media to basically essentially create a constructed world that everybody's in, whereby everything seems organic and everything seems that, well, this is always the way it's been. But you know, how does that happen? And a very good example of that, just to draw it sort of back to people, is the construction of an enemy in films. I mean, it wasn't too long ago that basically Russians were the bad guy in every single major blockbuster. Like in Rambo 2, basically the Taliban are the good guys. They help Rambo fight against the Russians, because at the time that was essentially what was going on. And then all of a sudden you're getting a shift in the late 90s in films like The Siege and Courage Under Fire and True Lies and various other films like this, where essentially there's a shift to Islamic terrorists. And what's strange about all of those films that are listed is they've all got the backing of the Department of Defense. Later we see films like Iron Man, still that's coming out, and basically that's very sort of anti where the bad guys are Islamic at the beginning of that. And again, that's fully funded by the American military. A lot of people, again, don't realise that films can be used as fabulous tools for propaganda, and often they receive the funding from the military. Essentially what it is you can approach the military and you can borrow any equipment that you want, so long as the military gets a final rewrite of the script and they feel that the script is beneficial to you. And so loads and loads of films like Top Gun, Green Berets, and the television series Jag, and Wind Talkers, and the majority of the Bond series, and all of these films have got a final rewrite by the American military, by the Pentagon. And so essentially once you know that, you realise that, hang on, maybe there is more to this. Maybe it's not just as simple as this is a nice piece of entertainment. Perhaps they're trying to subtly convey a message to me, because the people behind this have got an agenda. Yeah,
I would absolutely agree with that in my research too. It's certainly, it's the carrot and the stick, I think, isn't it? You know, we can help you and do all this for you, but we wanna say so. Yeah, I really couldn't see that the powers that be would want to help and not get some benefit from it.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, you know, this is proved by films like Apocalypse Now, which basically, obviously, that was considered unbecoming of Marines. There's no way that they would send somebody to terminate with prejudice a colonel or anything like that. Plus, the way that all of the characters act in that particular film, they felt that was unbecoming of Marines. So that was basically denied any help at all. And so they had to go to, I forget whether it was the Vietnamese or who, essentially they had to go to a local military, or the country that they're in military, but unfortunately they were fighting a war at the time. So this is one of the reasons that particular film took so very long to, and was so expensive, was because they had to forgo days and days of shooting because all their helicopters had to be whisked away.
Ah, I see. I'm not as one of my favourite films as such. You know, I realise that it's propaganda, most of the television and film industry, but it certainly, it was a
well, I mean, then you find out that this is I'm a huge fan. I'm a fan of The Godfather as well, and you find out that basically, you know, Coppola, for example, is totally mafiaed up. His father was a Italian businessman from Corleone.
Yeah.
So, you know, they're trying to tell you certain things in certain films, and so my particular favourite story about Apocalypse Now is that the character played by Dennis Hopper was going to be doing a film about Charles Manson, because especially at the time he felt that the trial was unjust and blah, 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 and Manson was quite a big thing in Hollywood, and, you know, he's friends with a lot of influential people, and so he was going to do a film about it, and he basically met him many times in prison to get all the mannerisms off and stuff like that. This film was eventually canned because essentially, you know, it was, he became persona non grata in 71. But the character that the journalist that is played by Dennis Hopper in that film, if you look at it, he's basically doing an impression of Charles Manson.
Yeah, I could see that now. Yeah, it makes sense.
What's interesting about Dennis Hopper is one of the people that exposed what was going on at the El Cielo house where the Tate murders happened. Aside from the fact that Dennis Hopper's father was an OSS officer, OSS was precursor to the CIA, and essentially he came out with he was talking about at the Tate's house there was a drug dealer who was probably a gentleman called Billy Doyle, and he was tied up by Wojtek Frykowski, who was one of the murdered people, and he was it was filmed, he was whipped, and apparently he was sodomized as well, and Dennis Hopper was the person that sort of broke this story to the world, apparently. So, you know, it's one of these weird intertwining things.
Yeah, that's what it seems to all be, intertwining in every way, shape and form. It's very difficult to know that you were talking about Dennis Hopper trying to get things in, and yeah, I mean, I was aware that his father was in the military, and there's many other people that's been very, very similar, fathers in the military and having things to do with mind control. Would you like?
Oh, absolutely, yeah, totally. Right. I mean, the mind control thing, I mean, what was strange was that a lot of the people, you know, just bring that to the facts about it, was that a lot of the doctors that were involved in it were publishing documents that were, you know, explaining their experiments were ridiculously well thought about. I mean, Ewan Cameron was basically based in Montreal at the Allen Memorial Institute, and he was essentially doing mind-wiping exercises. He called his process the annihilation of the mind, and it was basically putting people into drug-induced comas for weeks at a time and inducing huge amounts of LSD, you know, often for like 60 days at a time. And once this is done, which basically completely wipes the mind and turns them into a vegetative state that he called annihilation. This is what he called it. He would then basically strap headphones to these people and tie them to a bed so that they couldn't escape, and play these messages over and over and over and over again. And essentially what this was called was psychic driving. So what he was trying to do was what he called it was D-pattern clients. The people who'd gone in there for very, very mild cases of depression. One girl that went in there, basically, she had an argument with her parents. She had a new boyfriend that they didn't particularly like. They took her in. They weren't particularly, you know, upset with her. They were saying she's a bit strong-willed. We just wanted to understand. And he wiped her memory. He totally wiped her memory. I mean, and essentially what he would do is then he'd put all these new patterns back in with the headphones, and this was called psychic driving. And so essentially the point was, we've got somebody who's depressed, alcoholic, whatever, so we're going to take away that harmful, negative pattern, which was their memories, personality, and essentially their soul, if you really want to go into it. And then what we're going to do is we're going to implant a new, harmless pattern. But what this involved was essentially teaching somebody to be a person again. Like, the one very famous case was Linda McDonald, and she was in there for an awful long time. When she sort of came out, She didn't know who she was. She didn't know who her husband was. She didn't know what the concept of a husband was. She didn't know how to talk. She didn't know how to walk. She didn't know how to use the toilet. She was basically reduced to the level of an infant. And the point that I was making is that this was advertised as a therapeutic method. And at the time, Ewan Cameron was the head of the World Psychiatric Association, the American Psychiatric Association, the Canadian Psychiatric Association, and he was on the board of the Nuremberg trials with people like John Rawlings Rees, who ran the Tavistock Institute, and they were essentially prosecuting Nazis for human experimentation, which is exactly what they were doing later on. The equivalent in England to Ewan Cameron was a chap called William Sargent. William Sargent was based at St Thomas's Hospital in London, and his experiments were entirely the same. He was definitely connected to MI5. He was also connected to MI6, and he shared material with Sidney Gottlieb, who was the head of MKUltra, Louis Jolyon West, who provided him with massive amounts of drugs like thorazine and sarazine and stuff like that to be used on unwitting patients in St Thomas's Hospital, and Frank Olson as well, who was a senior biochemist that was actually murdered because he was about to start spilling the beans about well, what happened was he saw in one of these experiments it didn't work, and they were using captured soldiers, I forget what nationality, and they were trying to do a sort of quick in the field brainwashing scenario, and essentially it didn't work, so they told these people, right, dig your own graves, and then they shot them all in the back of their head, and this basically upset the guy. He was going to sort of leave the project, and so they spiked him with LSD and then threw him out of a window.
Very nice of them.
Yep. I mean, the whole point of the mind control as well, I mean, again, this is a documented fact, is when it comes down to two events, is one is essentially the Russian show trials and the prosecution of, I think it was a Hungarian priest called Karl Mendetsky, and then later on the sort of confessions by American GIs that were apparently drawn out of them by Russian and Korean mind control operatives. And basically the first one was in a lot of these show trials, people were basically standing up and robotically admitting to crimes that they couldn't have possibly done and ensuring their own doom. And this was sort of put about in the Western media and in the Western world as, my God, look at this new science that's coming out of the communist East. And then the Korean thing was essentially apparently like crashed soldiers, captured soldiers during the Korean War, were going on television and sort of renouncing their American patriotism, joining communist causes, and exhibiting uncharacteristic, personality traits that assured everybody at home that they'd been somehow robotically controlled. Now, the Russian thing is very possibly true, and the Mendetsky and stuff like that, but it was all sort of not particularly very sophisticated. It was more sort of torturing somebody until they're just a shadow of their former self. The Korean and Chinese techniques is a bit strange because the CIA launched an operation called QK Chiklet and QK Hilltop, and these were investigations into different techniques that came from around the world, and basically what came back was that there was nothing special going on. They weren't using any drugs, they weren't using anything like that. They were using sleep deprivation and isolation and wearing them down with lack of food and stress positions and stuff like that, and just repeatedly shouting at them that unless you confess you're going to die. And it takes about 4 to 6 weeks, and basically if you do that to anybody and isolate them, you can flip them into basically doing whatever you want. What's interesting is that later in the 70s, when it came out there and the MKUltra sort of documents were being released and stuff like that, it transpired that the American Navy had an operation called Chatter that was started in 1947, and Bluebird and Artichoke started in 1950 and 1951, suspiciously on the anniversary of Hitler's birth, but I'm sure that's a coincidence. And all of these projects, which were far more sophisticated anyway than the supposed Russian and Chinese techniques, they all predated the Korean War, and they predated all these incidents so it was absolute garbage anyway. The reason that people got these concepts of brainwashing and even the word brainwashing came from a book by a chap who you may have heard of called E. Howard Hunt. He was one of the Watergate burglars and was apparently involved in the what was he involved in? The assassination of JFK, and he's something to do with SciTech as well, which is a remote viewing organisation, I believe. But he basically wrote a book called Brainwashing in Red China, and that was a bestseller, and it was popularised this concept that, you know, Fu Manchu style sort of mysterious guys from the East with, you know, long beards and stuff like that can sort of take over your mind. Even the word brainwashing was a phrase that was developed by Howard Hunt. It came from, it was going to be called menticide, which is Latin, which means the destruction of the mind. But they didn't use that because he felt that like a more flesh and blood term would be better. So brainwash comes from the Chinese term sai now, which means a cleansing of the mind. They couldn't use the Latin for mind control because unfortunately the Latin for mind control is government.
Yeah.
So that would have sort of given the game away. It's absolutely true. Government or governor-menta, which is, you know, the control of the mind control.
Yeah, that's my recollection of that is steer the mind, which is obviously govern the mind. Yeah. I think I would have definitely given the game away, I think.
Well, yeah, there's a little bit too on the nose, that one. So we probably just slickly avoided that one.
You mentioned the Nazis in Tavistock. Would you like to go into a little bit more of the Nazi thing and the Tavistock?
Yeah, sure. I mean, the Nazi mind control experiments were Dachau, were Auschwitz. A lot of them were in Mengele, and the ones at Dachau were mescaline experiments. Mescaline is an extract of peyote, which is a hallucinogenic cactus, and it's kind of like LSD. It's not quite as intense. And what they were doing were interrogation experiments in order to break down the will of the subject, and they were also doing other things like torture and barbiturate-induced comas and electroshock and stuff, and a lot of techniques that were remarkably similar to the techniques that were taken not 5-10 years later by people that were actually on the Nuremberg trial. So it was very clear that a lot of these techniques were taken from Nazi Germany and basically just continued through Operation Paperclip. Operation Paperclip was bringing a lot of the scientists. The excuse again was to make sure that the Russians didn't get them. The whole of NASA, Werner von Braun, and all the people that were involved in NASA were involved in the V2 rockets. And the Nazis, and Werner von Braun was an ardent Nazi, essentially. He was the head of NASA. One of the hilarious things about Werner von Braun is that his file said, Werner von Braun is an ardent Nazi, and then it listed all his crimes. And when they amended it to be published in America, all they did was put the word not in. So it said, Werner von Braun is, arrow, not an ardent Nazi, and then it listed all his crimes. Yeah. And that was seen as sufficient, basically. Mengele is another one, obviously the angel of death. He was doing experiments with twins and stuff like that. He did what was called trauma bonding, and he discovered that if you get somebody to kill somebody that is dear to you, and somebody that is, say, a sibling or, say, a twin, the trauma induced is so severe that it basically it resets your brain almost. You just can't cope with it to the point where you can just be coerced into anything. And that sounds very, very strange, but it's essentially the same psychological processes that happens with prostitutes and pimps. You know, you knock somebody about enough, and basically you destroy their ego and their sense of self and their sense of self-worth to the point where they get what's called, it's almost like a sort of moral schizophrenia where basically the superego is so strong and pervasive that they take on board anything bad that happens to them is their fault, including somebody else hitting them. And furthermore, if you're in such an abusive relationship, you get this, it's like a Stockholm syndrome, whereby you go, alright, it's pretty bad, I'm pretty messed up, but the attacker or the abuser could have killed me if they really wanted to, and they haven't killed me. So what they've done is they've given me mercy, or they've shown me mercy, which is essentially another word for love. And so you can manipulate somebody into being your slave by being particularly brutal and horrible to them. And that's what you see in cases like Fritzl, in Austria, and what's those 3 girls that just escaped in Ohio, and a couple of those are, they're basically talking about they wish they were back there. It seems bizarre, but because you're fundamentally starting all these psychological processes to the point where you have an internal battle with yourself. Anyway, Mengele was, I believe he was taken away by, probably by the CIA, possibly through Vatican rat lines, and taken to Argentina and then Chile, and to continue experimentation. And so, a lot of others, Klaus Barbie and Werner Braun, and Otto Sarensky, and all of these very, very, very top-level Nazis were taken away by the Vatican or the CIA. Mengele was stopped about 3 times during his escape and then mysteriously let go. And again, it just, a lot of, when you start to look at it from a bit further back, you go, oh, I see what they were doing. It's just, getting the information to America. I mean, it depends how far you want to go into it, because the Nazi Party was founded by Wall Street. Yeah. A lot of the top-level CIA were not opposed to Nazi ideology. A lot of them were essentially Nazis or elitists with a forbearance that they, as rich white people, were probably better than everybody on Earth, let alone, races or anything like that. And a lot of it is to do with Freemasons, which I know that Hitler publicly sort of professed against. But it all gets very, very complicated. Yeah. But essentially it would appear that there was a continuation of these Nazi mind control techniques that were taken back to America and back to England and continued. Obviously the Tavistock Institute. This was sort of going on at the same time, and it's remarkably similar because it started as the Tavistock Clinic in 1920, it was during the First World War, and what they were doing, apparently they were looking at the rehabilitation of soldiers that were returning from the trenches with shell shock and with various post-traumatic stress disorders and that sort of thing. What they appear to be doing is studying these people to see what the effects of certain trauma are on the human psyche and what the ultimate breaking point of man is. And the Tavistock Clinic sort of merged into the Tavistock Institute and then later into the Tavistock Institute of Human Relations. And it's a charitable psychological organisation, but it has tentacles everywhere. It goes through military-industrial complexes, it goes through Department of Defence, government organisations, blue-chip organisations, NGOs, quangos, all of these sort of things. And what they tend to do is they tend to teach business and training, how to be the most successful, a lot of public relations exercises and social control. Certain things that have come through, certain things that I believe have come through Tavistock are, I think a lot of common purpose stuff is Tavistock. It's certainly based on Tavistock techniques. I'll give you a basic one that probably everybody's had. It happened to my sister this week. You'll have a team building exercise at work, and you'll be in a small room and it'll be hot, and you'll be doing some pointless task, possibly building. The last one I had to do was you were building a model of an elephant, and you had to go as a team, and it's not really to see how you're going as a team. It's there just to basically bolster this concept of family and this idea that essentially you owe the company that you're working for something, so be obedient. And at some point, one of you will get sick to the back teeth of it, and you'll go, this is crap, this is nonsensical, you're wasting my time, this isn't helping me to be better at my job, this is just trying to turn me into some sort of moronic robot that's just, this concept of companies, and we want to do what's good for the company. The company doesn't exist as a person, so it doesn't matter how many times you lick spittle around the company and do things that are good for the company is never going to come around to your house and pat you on the back. But this is the concept that's got to be in there, because it's Malthusian you're a cog in a machine, or you're a vital component of this huge mechanism, or you're an atom in a cell. Do you know what I mean? So, but this is the concept that they go. So anyway, one of you will get sick of this and say, I'm not doing this, this is bullshit, I'm going out of the room. And the person will go, take you out and go, I'm really glad that you've got this. I'm really glad that you've actually spoke up like that. This isn't about team building. This is to spot people like you, people with potential, people that could go far in this building, and they'll flatter the hell out of you. And basically what they'll say is, so you've won. So if you could just do me the favour of shutting your mouth for the next hour or whatever, going back into this room and just letting us wash over you with our NLP, then, you know, that'll be fine. So essentially deflatter any dissent out of you. If you go back in and you start getting bored again and going, oh God, this is rubbish, then what they'll do is they'll love bomb you. They'll say, all right, everybody tell us what about so-and-so. John here, he's really good. Like, tell us 3 things that you think are positive about him. And they'll love bomb you into submission. If that doesn't work, they'll all round on you and tell you why they think you're irritating. And they'll shame you into submission. And this is a very, very basic technique of social control within the workplace, by altering your perceptions, by appealing to your natural winning instinct, by appealing to shame, by appealing to flattery, by appealing to your sense of self-worth, and then ultimately by appealing to your not wanting to be in the minority. Now, Tavistock is a general sort of idea, postulated that society should be controlled by exterior prods of fear and trauma constantly, to reduce the morale and the critical analytical processes of a population. And what they wanted to do was reduce people to a fluid state, which was like being a child, where you're constantly going to an authoritarian person for reassurance or for guidance. And they called this social turbulence. And it was started by a guy called Kurt Lewin, who, again, he was a German psychiatrist. He was a member of the Frankfurt School, which is where people get the concept of cultural Marxism, but it was actually started by British intelligence. A lot of people don't know that. He was a founder member of the OSS, which went on to the CIA, and then obviously he started Tavistock. He was then connected to loads of eugenic organisations that were also connected to MKUltra. And so, again, we see massive cross-contamination of the intelligence agencies. You know, this concept that the Russians against the Americans against the English, and the Americans against the Russians, or whatever, it's for the tourists. It's just there, like the Cold War, to provide a distraction so that it can funnel huge amounts of money into the military-industrial complex, and everyone's terrified of being blown up by a nuclear bomb. Interesting, the term Cold War came out of Tavistock. It was scripted by none other than our friend Walter Lippmann. Right. But that's what Tavistock do. Tavistock used social control and the deconstruction of language to normalize things. You know what we were saying earlier, this concept of the manufacture of consent, or the engineering of consent. Mm-hmm. Well, here's one, regime change. We don't kill a tyrant, we don't go in there, we don't take over, we don't invade, we never invade, we go in there and change the regime. There's never civilian casualties. What there are is collateral damage. One of the famous ones that Tavistock invented was during the Second World War, a lot of Americans didn't want to actually get involved in the war, principally because a lot of them were actually German, because, you know, it's a migratory country, and, you know, also it's nothing to do with them. You know, they really didn't want to be bothered, to be quite honest, prior to the sort of Pearl Harbor event. So we put about this concept of isolationists, and you get this, you see this on Fox News. Bill O'Reilly will do this sort of thing, and Sean Hannity will do it. They'll come up with a concept and sling a name. It's mudslinging. It's an ad hominem attack. That essentially anyone that didn't want to be involved in the war was called an isolationist, and was therefore deemed unpatriotic. And again, it's a very, very sort of powerful mechanism. Recently, they did this stupid thing with the freedom fries, you know. Well, it's not recently now, is it? Like, can't call them French fries because the French are opposed to whatever they're opposed to. And obviously, they're not opposed to it. The French are war masters, for crying out loud. But you know, we're going to call French fries freedom fries because it bolsters our sense of community. It's us against the world. But that's not a new thing. In the First World War, Tavistock swept in, and because, you know, bad feeling against Germany, or to bolster bad feeling against Germany, sauerkraut was renamed Liberty Cabbage.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's ludicrous, isn't it? But I mean, these are the techniques that are used, and people don't realise that a lot of it's to do with the news media. I mean, it was Edward Bernays and Ivy Lee that actually first realised that you can release stories that have an agenda and have an advertising or a marketing or a perception management or a public relations agenda that are actually presented as organic news stories. And we were chatting about this just before we came on. Like, to me, this is insulting. Right? This is a very, very basic one. But J.K. Rowling, it's just come out today, literally, like, before we come on, it says, oh, a book's been released and it transpired.
Oh, have we lost you, Neil? I think we may have lost Neil here, guys. Give me a wee second.
Oh, I think.
Oh, no, we're back again. Yep, good.
Oh, we're back. Somebody doesn't like us slagging off J.K. Rowling.
Yeah.
Well, basically, he's come on today, all these critics have come out and gone, oh, we're so astonished to discover that this book released by the same publishing company that J.K. Rowling has, it's not this unknown author, it's J.K. Rowling. And, you know, to my mind, if you've been a book critic for that long, you would look into it and go, well, this is very suspicious that this first-time author has got this massive publicity campaign and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But furthermore than that, I don't believe it for a second. All these critics that are coming on the news and saying, well, I'm astonished that it's J.K. Rowling, they've been paid by the publishing company. This whole event is a marketing campaign. Events that are on the news, 50 Shades of Grey. Any of these events, wow, this is a cultural event, isn't it? And it's so huge that we just have to talk about it. It's bullshit. Like, you've been paid to talk about it by a marketing firm, and then you've basically shown it in a perspective that it's an organic, natural story. And what's the result of the J.K. Rowling thing? The second anybody finds out that this book's written by J.K. Rowling, and it's all supposed to be quite good, everybody goes, oh, well, I don't want to miss out on the trend. Sales of her book went up by 507,000% today,
Yep.
right? And people still can't figure out that's a marketing campaign. They're laughing at you. They're absolutely pissing themselves. When 50 Shades of Grey came out, oh, this is outrageous, isn't it? Have you heard about it? No, I've not heard about it. Oh, it's outrageous, isn't it? That's how marketing campaigns work. They have to be fed to you so that you don't realise they're a marketing campaign. Because you realise that somebody's trying to sell you something rather than do you a favour, you start to go, all right, there's an angle here. This is the whole concept of point of sales techniques. Nobody ever asks you, do you want to buy this car? Everybody always asks you, is this the sort of car that you would like to own?
Yeah.
Because, of course you would. But you probably can't afford it. How embarrassing. So all of a sudden you're worried that this person sat next to you thinks that you're a lesser person. That's a mind control technique to basically take your eye off the ball. And it's the same thing with all these other things. It basically came on. I mean, it didn't work. J.K. Rowling released a book under the name J.K. Rowling, and everyone looked at it and goes, oh yeah, transpires she's not really much of an author. She writes children's books. And that's the other thing, this concept of promoting Harry Potter. Oh, I love Harry Potter. Oh, it's brilliant. At least he's getting kids to read it. Getting kids to read, it's a children's book.
Yeah.
It's a children's book. End of story. If you want to get kids to read, get them to read good books.
Yeah, exactly.
So, to be honest, but this concept, yeah, again, it's a marketing campaign. It's a normal naturalization. Lord of the Rings was laughed at. Absolutely laughed at. What's up? There's a sitcom with Samantha James in it and Ben Chapman called Game On. And in the very first episode of that, she's trying to find a nice guy, and this bloke walks up to her and goes, have you read Lord of the Rings? And she goes, oh my God. Because at that particular time, the concept of Lord of the Rings was ultra nerddom. Then the film comes out, which to my mind was far nerdier than the actual book. It's just, again, it's for selling toys and all this sort of stuff. That comes out, and then all of a sudden the public perception of Lord of the Rings, oh no, it's cool, it's an epic story and stuff like that. Now, the story itself has not changed. What's changed is now somebody's selling it, and so they have to convince you that it's now a viable thing for you to be excited about.
Yeah. And essentially what you're saying there is any publicity is good publicity, and in any way, shape and form that they could do it.
Yes. I mean, obviously, Jimmy Savile's not doing very well of late, and Stuart Hall's not doing very well of late, but you'd be surprised how the destruction of a celebrity can ultimately use to bring them back Lazarus style. There's nothing that the public will like more than seeing someone being destroyed, but then once they've been destroyed, you can guilt them into going, actually, they've changed their ways now, blah, blah, blah. Christ, Jeffrey Archer's done that so many times.
Yeah.
So, then he sells millions and millions of books. So, you're right. When certain things, like, again, Rihanna's the one at the minute, and Cara Delevingne, she's a model, isn't she? And, like, all these people getting caught smoking weed, getting caught with coke up their nose and stuff like that, getting caught, pissed and stumbling around at festivals, even doing things like getting into fist fights with the boyfriend and crashing the Lamborghini, and, all of this. You'd assume that this was a bad thing. It's not. It makes them dangerous.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's the point. It's a subtle second point of sales marketing technique where you're hyping up interest in this artist. Now, it's stuff like people are really convinced that this Justin Bieber's doing himself a disservice at the minute, being like an arse. He's always been an arse. He's now a dangerous, sexy teenage arse that's got so much money, blah, 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 blah. Like, he's too much of an entity. He's too much of a marketing revenue and a cash stream for anybody that's involved with him to allow anything negative to ever come out. So, he could have a dead prostitute in his wardrobe. You'd never find out about that. He spits at his neighbour, or he's driving around fast, or whatever. It's all over the place, and people think, we've got this little cock, we're really going to destroy his career. You're not going to destroy his career. All you're doing is making teenage girls swoon. Because now he's gone from that little kid that you want to mother to, he's a bad boy. If only I could tame him. And again, these are very, very obvious and very, very tried and tested marketing campaigns, marketing strategies, or perception management techniques in order to make people seem. You've got to do that nowadays. People that usually, like any sort of new genre or whatever, it goes through 3 stages in my mind. Is cautionary curiosity, commodity, and it's a way of neutralising any sort of positive social effects out of it and basically turning it into money. First stage, and as you see this with jazz, you see this, you go back as far in sort of concertos and stuff like that. You see it in rock and roll, you see it in hip hop, you see it in punk, you see it in garage, you see it in drum and bass, you see it in every new grime, every new genre. First, what about the children? This music encourages drugs. This does this. Oh my God, it's going to lead to the downfall of society. Next stage is curiosity, where it's alright for Bill Cosby to dress up with a silly big hat and baggy jeans and do a rap. It's alright for Dick Emery to do a gag where he's got a mohawk on or whatever, because now we're taking the potency out of this message, say punk or hip-hop or whatever. We're going to dilute it and make it something silly. And once it's silly, it's not threatening anymore. And once it's not threatening anymore, we can take all that potency out of it, and we can market it with softened off edges. And it's a commodity all of a sudden. So rather than Sex Pistols and the Clash and stuff like that, you've got secondary wave of punk bands that are essentially all they're saying is, I'm a punk band, I've got a mohawk, I wear a black leather jacket. And so all they're talking about is the signs and signifiers of the genre, and it becomes interminably circular, where they're not talking about anything different. Grime music is the big one, like a huge amount of really, really talented artists, like within the grime milieu, and it's died on its arse. It's dead and I'm trying to think, why has it died? A few artists who've got to like Red Street 2 and Devlin and people like that, Dizzy Rascal, but they've completely changed up the style. They're now very, very pop, very, very slick, and to ostensibly to appeal to a mass market. But what struck me is that it's lost its potency. It's lost its youth movement vitality. It's lost its connection to the streets. It's lost its connection to raves. It's not being done. You can't do it in your bedroom anymore. You can't organise a gig at your local community centre because you've got to compete now with the new standard, which is Devlin, Rush 32 style production, which has got to be, good enough to go on MTV. And the message is to all the kids that are out there, basically, there's no point doing this thing anymore. It's lost its post. It's not selling. It's rubbish. It's absolute rubbish. You can, there's a this is, Immortal Techniques says, there's a market for everything. There's an absolute market for anything. There's a market for amputee porn. Are you telling me you can't find a market for, intelligent, aggressive, urban music? Of course you can. Yeah. It exists. Every market exists. Every disgusting, weird, niche interest that everybody's got in the world, there's a market for it. But but apparently you can't sell this, you can't sell this. No, I don't buy it. I believe that it's softened off. And it depends how sinister you want to go. Is it a social control thing? Is it we don't want people critically thinking? Is it we don't want people with synapses going off and blah-blah-blah and questioning stuff? Or is it just simply that basically, look, we've got a business model here, let's not muck it up?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Do you know what I mean? And you could make an argument for either. I tend to lean towards the former because but using the concept of just not upsetting the apple cart to keep people in their place. Because you don't need to explain. This is the point that people would say, oh, so you're telling me the entertainment industry is the cahoots with the Illuminati or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not what I've said, but you don't need to be, because basically all you need is people's prescribed roles, their engineered consensual roles, with the social norms. If you're a CEO, you do this. If you're a blah-blah, you do this. Mm-hmm. Then you start implementing things like shareholder. Do you know it is illegal for a company to do something that is detrimental to their shareholder, which means it is illegal for a company to lower prices, because that would mean that the shareholders are losing money.
Yep.
It's mental. It's crazy. What happens when you get boards, cross-contamination of CEO boards? For example, Time Warner is connected to military-industrial complex, connected to oil, and it's connected to the entertainment industry, and it's connected to the news media.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So you get instances where they won't put out a certain artist because they're talking badly about Palestine, the Palestine conflict, Israel and Palestine, or oil companies, or Halliburton, or anything like that. So essentially the record company's got nothing to do with that. But because of the cross-contamination of shareholders, it is illegal for them to put out a certain artist because it would be detrimental to their parent company. And it's the same thing with news media. So what happens when a story comes up that's detrimental to the parent company? Well, I'll tell you what happens. Unless they absolutely have to, they just don't put it out.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, they're not going to put anything that's detrimental to what they're trying to achieve. You touched on the music industry there. Would you like to go back a little bit and sort of show how deep it runs and how far back it runs?
Well, I mean, again, this is really dependent on what you sort of think. I mean, there are certain people that would go, the whole point of rock and roll and the infectious induction of African rhythms was to lusty up the mind and send randy teenagers to their doom. I'm not sure that that's the case. Certainly the induction as a teenager meant that they were a saleable commodity now. And they also had rules and regulations. Do you know what I mean? And because the whole concept of teenage rebellion, on the face of it, sounds very, very good. And it is. And it's brilliant to be a teenager and whatnot. But how do you know how to be a rebel unless you've got Marlon Brando telling you how to do it? Yeah. So again, this sort of seeming movement of freedom is a prescribed and constructed thing whereby people learn their role in society, and not necessarily at the beginning, but very, very, very soon afterwards. I mean, even as far the Beatles, for example, they're the ones who sort of were able to utilize people. Well, we did several things, albums, the promotion of actually putting out long-playing albums and stuff like that. The sort of massive the construction of the Beatles through Brian Epstein and people like that, people don't realise that they paid girls to scream at them. Frank Sinatra paid girls to scream at them to create this hype machine. No doubt they were very talented people, but, you know, again, it is a construct without a huge machine behind them and the sort of huge profit margins that they were making. It wouldn't have been quite the same. But again, with and the Beatles was a very well marketed, and again, not to take anything away from them, but you've got the edge of John Lennon, you've got the affability of Paul McCartney, who's sort of the person that your mum likes, and then there's Ringo, who everybody likes, and there's George that can actually play a bit. And, you know, John and Paul could as well, the original Paul could. But, and again, it depends how far you want to go. There's a lot of people with the school of thought that Tavistock, and particularly a gentleman called Theodore Adorno, who came from the Frankfurt School, were involved in the construction of the Beatles and stuff like that. I wouldn't go that far. A lot of people would say that all their stuff was written by the Beatles. The Beatles are very strange. Like, they certainly popularised LSD. Mm-hmm. They certainly popularised occultism to an extent, along with the Rolling Stones. The Rolling Stones did for their Satanic Majesty's Request and Goat's Head Soup, and obviously the Beatles had Aleister Crowley on the front of the Sgt. Pepper album, and there's a lot of people that suggest that Sgt. Pepper is a reference to Aleister Crowley, and specifically to Apep, which was a big snake god of death from Egypt, and that's why we have Pepsi and Dr. Pepper and many things like that. But apparently, this is what some people's schools have thought are. One interesting thing is that the Beatles, when they were fabulous for confusion, because essentially they championed, and then he makes this statement about being bigger than Jesus in America, and then all of a sudden you're channeling people against them and stuff like that. Once they started talking about love, they were completely ruined by the association to the Manson family, which, by the way, is complete rubbish. Charles Manson never said any of those things. Charles Manson was not a fan of the Beatles. The whole concept of Helter Skelter, the White Album, and the Beatles being the four angels of the apocalypse, and the cockroaches being his doom buggies and all that, it was made up by Vincent Bugliosi, who was the prosecutor, Paul Watkins, who wasn't even there when the murders took place, and Sadie Atkins, because basically at the time she thought that she was going to be able to plea bargain out of the thing. So, but one interesting thing is that the Abbey Road front cover, you know, the one that's a lot of people say is very Masonic, where they're making this sort of V shapes with the legs and across the zebra crossing, which is obviously the black and white checkerboard. Mm-hmm. That was taken on August the 8th, 1969, which is exactly the same time that Sharon Tate was being murdered.
It's astonishing how the coincidences, if you like, line up.
Well, see, my point is that the Beatles weren't influencing Charles Manson or the Manson family. The Manson family itself is a misnomer anyway. It didn't really exist. But they weren't influencing the family, so to speak. The concept of the Manson family was used retrospectively to attack the whole hippie, free love, communistic living movement, and then it was also used to attack the Beatles, who were also spreading stuff about love, transcendentalism, and various sort of spiritual sort of approaches, and by, you know, tying them in with this other gentleman who was also supposedly into all this sort of stuff, it basically just taints it and just kills off the 60s. The other things that they were used to kill off the 60s were the drug bust on the Rolling Stones and the murder of Brian Jones of the Rolling Stones. And again, this is all tied in with the use of LSD and the promotion of the LSD culture in America, and specifically the Haight-Ashbury area and the Laurel Canyon bands. But again, you know, you have this sort of cross-contamination with the bands in England as well. I mean, music's an incredibly powerful and potent tool for control on a number of levels. I mean, just very basically, a minor chord will make you feel kind of sad, and a major chord will make you feel kind of uplifted, because of the sound of it, and that's the emotion that it evokes. But you can use music to alter perception of time, and that's why they play music when you're listening on the phone rather than listening to the ring, because it literally you forget how long you've been sat there waiting.
Mm-hmm.
It's also why they play music in Muzak in shopping centres, because basically your brain's got like a finite bandwidth. It's got so much information that it can take in. So if you fill a portion of that with music, particularly irritating, repetitive music that sort of, earworms its way into your subconscious, then you've only got so much reasoning capacity left. And then if you combine that with, I don't know, bright colours, occasional people shouting on the tannoy, neon lights, big fluorescent stars that are telling you about sale items, intentionally confusing layouts, shops that all look the same, that sort of thing. And all of a sudden you're really confused and you step out of the supermarket or the shopping centre with a load of stuff that, I just don't know why I bought this, I just didn't go in to buy this, it just seemed like a good idea at the time. Yeah. So, that's how any cult that you join, they'll use music in the same way. If you watch the 700 Club or any of these things, I watched a Benny Hinn, he's an evangelical Christian in America, and I watched one of his things once, and they've got a constant choir in the background for exactly the same reason, like just to fill your brain. The other thing that you'll do at evangelical churches is they'll get you standing and swaying your arms and constantly repeating mantras back and forth or prayers or anything that's repetitive, because that repetitive nature locks you into sort of an alpha state brainwave, combined with being tired, combined with being on your feet, combined with following instructions. It's a cult induction technique. That's exactly how they'll get you into anything, really. Do you know what I mean? Like, they'll sit you in a place and make you watch a video for 3 or 4 hours until you don't know what day it is. But yeah, so, and the connection with music companies, we sort of briefly said before, the connection with directing youth, directing revenue streams, directing anger towards people or anything, is very, very potent. Like, the whole creation of the war between rappers in America, like in the 90s, this thing called the East Coast, West Coast War. And it was all hyped up and manufactured by the press, and also with help of certain magazines, Vibe magazine, which had revenue streams that came directly from the CIA, and Death Row Records, which was one of the record companies that was apparently involved in this coastal argument, also had revenue connections to the CIA. And it was essentially, the whole point was to move rap music from any positive, self-promoting or organically black-owned, powerful business venture and turning it into violence and aggressiveness and linking it with crack, which had just sort of exploded in America thanks to the CIA, which is, shown in Dark Alliance and stuff like that. The financing of Death Row Records came from Harry O, or Michael Harris, who was dealing directly with the Medellin and Freeway Ricky Ross, who were dealing directly with the CIA to bring cocaine in. And then you've got this sort of concept of fermenting the concept of a crack dealer or a ghetto-dwelling black youth that's pushed out through this gangster rap and this new milieu. So, music can be used like that. The music of the 60s, a lot of the music of the 60s, the Laurel Canyon bands and stuff like that, on the face of it, it's anti-authority and it's anti-war, but it's not. If you actually listen to it, the whole point of certainly like groups like the Grateful Dead, it transpired that Jerry Garcia was a CIA asset, and basically he was given a guitar and told, go and form this freaky group, which were originally called the Warlocks, but then were changed to the Grateful Dead. And the whole point of them was to move kids away from politicization, move them away from active, real-life social issues, and move them into drugs, mysticism, and dropping out. I mean, the whole concept of Timothy Leary, tune on, tune and drop out. Fine, drop out, because then you're not actually fighting against the state. Timothy Leary was another one who was a CIA agent, financed by the CIA, worked with CIA agents, Claude Meyer, Frank Bannon, Ronald Stark, all these people, Michael Hollingshead, all of these people were intelligence agencies. Aldous Huxley was intelligence agency. And so the whole point of this concept of the hippie movement in the 60s and this whole new musical movement. On the face of it, it was organic. It was from the youth. It was something that basically that was theirs, and they were going to make a effect a change within the world because of this. And actually, what happened? Nothing. And like other people, like Dave McGowan is brilliant at this. He's got a series of articles called Inside the LCD, the almost true story of Laurel Canyon. He details in there numerous of the Laurel Canyon bands and the hippie bands and the 60s bands. Well, nearly to a man, they're connected to military-industrial complex, or the parents are a military-industrial complex. And the famous two are Jim Morrison, who was the son of Stephen Morrison, who was the admiral on deck for the Gulf of Tonkin incident. Mm-hmm. Like the mind control event that never took place, where they fabricated an attack by the Vietnamese, which drew the Americans into the Vietnam War. Strangely, Jim Morrison never spoke about that. He decided instead to tell the press that his parents were dead, when in fact both of them outlived him. He was reportedly abused by his father, which gives you maybe MK Ultra. And he also believed that he had an alternate personality, which was the spirit of a dead Native American shaman that gave him his talent. The other one is Frank Zappa, who basically is again championed as being this great big hippie. Describes himself as a conservative Republican. He's very anti-drugs, very anti-hippie, promotes the military-industrial complex, and was grown up, and grew up on Edgewood Arsenal. His father was a military scientist and chemist connected with Edgewood Arsenal, which is essentially where all the mind-controlled drugs were.
Yeah, I'd see everything that you said there. In my awakening of sort of finding out things, you learn something, and then the hippie flower power, loves the way to do it, and the rest of it, and then you came along and just blew all that out of the water. And it was like,
it gets worse than that, mate. My latest thing, I've not sort of like finalised any of this, but this is my sort of latest investigation. I've got a sneaking suspicion that all drug movements are ultimately controlled by the CIA or by the powers that be, and they're promoted through music. And I was just going back and thinking about all the different bands and how successful they were and how you could attach specific drugs to them. Obviously the 60s movement is psychedelics and stuff like that. And I started to think of like Marilyn Manson promoted ecstasy and absinthe in a big way. Nine Inch Nails promoted absinthe in a big way. Motorhead. What's a Motorhead? It's someone that takes speed. How did I find that out? Because of the band Motorhead. And I'm not suggesting that Motorhead or Marilyn Manson are in on this. I'm suggesting that somebody is seized upon that particular name as useful for pushing forward an agenda. Eminem, pills, and prescription pills. Nirvana, heroin. P. Doherty, heroin. Do you know what I mean? Like, there's so many different sort of milieus of musician attached to drugs. And what's strange is that every time that a new drug comes out, you get a celebrity busted taking this drug. And it's like you were saying earlier, there's no such thing as bad publicity. Recently, MCAT or methadone or bath salts is a big thing. In England, we had a couple of pop stars getting caught doing that. When ecstasy was the big thing, E17 got caught doing that. When LSD was the big thing, the Beatles and the Rolling Stones got caught doing that, and the Beatles got caught with marijuana and stuff like that. What's strange is that I didn't know these drugs existed until these celebrities got caught with them.
Yeah.
It's like crack. When crack first came out in America, nobody knew it existed, and then all of a sudden on the news it was crack epidemic, this incredibly potent but incredibly cheap form of cocaine. It's like an advertisement. It's the same thing with people might not see this, but it's the same thing with like even the bath salts cannibal, which wasn't actually on bath salts or whatever. Like ostensibly that's a horrific story, but what that's sort of telling you is, my God, that guy was messed up. I could be that messed up for a very, very reasonable price by the sounds of it. And so all these anti-drug campaigns, they're really making awareness. They're making brand identity.
Yeah. I mean, that begs the question. I actually was going to ask you this question anyway. They say that smoking cannabis saves you from being mind controlled. And,
I've heard that, yeah.
I don't know how they come to that conclusion, but what's your take on it?
It's difficult. Again, it's a difficult one to say, because I know that they were using THC extract and high-grade marijuana in experiments at St. Elizabeth's Hospital. George Hunter White and other people were using it. It's not particularly effective as a sort of truth serum. I've heard that mind control can be stopped by marijuana use. I've also heard that it's quite, it's very good for you in a lot of health ways. Mm-hmm. So it's tricky. It's a very, very tricky one. I mean, I'm sure that there's ups and downs of every element of it. I mean, it's nice. Howard Marks is the one that a lot of people, yeah, he's a hero, he's a hero, he brought in all the weird and stuff like that. Yeah. He was working for MI6. If you read his wife's book, really? He was also not very well liked by everybody. He ratted on absolutely everybody, rolled on totally everybody, sold everyone down the river, and got off relatively scot-free.
Yeah, I didn't know that. Yeah.
Yeah, and how was he moving his weed? He was doing it with musicians. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. In the speakers of cabs and stuff like that. So, it's a very strange thing. I think marijuana is a lot better for you than any other drug. So, it's very, very difficult. There's things flying around at the minute. There's a YouTube thing saying, like, legalization of marijuana, it's the worst thing that could happen to the powers that be. It's the worst thing that can happen to Illuminati, etc., 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 etc. Because it allows for consciousness and blah, 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 blah. I don't think that's true. Because I just don't see how you can get around that. Mm-hmm. I can see that you growing your own and stuff like that, and fine. And, I'm an advocate of it. Go nuts with it, mate. Mm-hmm. But, I don't know if any drug. That's the thing that's quite clever about every drug as well, is it's marketed as stick it to the man. Yeah. Stick it to the man, have a line of coke or whatever. Who the bloody hell do you think's got the boats to bring all this coke in or whatever? Do you know, whatever? So, it's very tricky. I'd advocate marijuana over alcohol and all other drugs totally. Like, whether it does stop mind control, I don't know. I'd use the Bill Hicks thing. It doesn't promote laziness. It just makes you realise that certain things aren't worth doing.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, I agree with you what you're saying. Rick Simpson.
But I think it's each their own with any. The thing about drugs and any type of drug, right, is that people use hugely broad terms, right? Okay. Mm-hmm. Like you can abuse. Like there's different things. If you use a bicycle, you'll probably be alright. If you roll down the street on a bicycle with your eyes covered, with no hands on, you're probably going to fuck yourself up. Because you're abusing the situation. It's the same thing with any sort of drug or anything. Yeah. Like, if you're taking 80 Mars bars a day, you've got a problem. Do you know what I mean? Yeah. But it depends, because the use of certain drugs, again, the powers that be understand that these drugs can be used to turn people into lotus eaters. They can be used to, make people completely disenfranchised from the rest of the world. They can be used to kill people. Yeah. And what's interesting about that is that heroin per se, or diamorphine, there's not really any negative effects of that. It does cause constipation, and it does cause, medically, it's not the heroin itself that's causing this withering effect and is causing this, and obviously, the lack of appetite and stuff like that. It's the stuff that they bash it down with, the stuff that they cut it with, that's actually causing the majority of health problems in heroin addicts. Because there are cases where essentially people who can afford it and have medically pure drugs of whatever potency, have seemingly show no effects. So that's another interesting thing. Why is it so detrimental to people? Why is it at such low quality that's getting to the actual consumer? Is that a control system as well? I think it certainly is. Right? Because basically, it gives people the hint of the glamour, but it's also nasty. It's not, I guarantee that's not the same stuff. Whatever you're getting in the toilets at your local pub, it's not the same stuff that Bill Clinton's putting up his nose. Yeah. I guarantee that. Yeah. the other thing is that basically you introduce people to any type of drugs. I don't believe that any drug's a gateway drug. I don't think that marijuana is a gateway drug any more than coffee is a gateway drug. It's a stimulant, alcohol's a gateway drug. It's only a gateway drug in as much as you've tried that, and now there's something new to try. Crikey, yeah. Would you say that trousers are a gateway clothes because you're then going to try shorts?
Yeah.
No, of course not. It's a semantic argument. But what it does do is it puts you in an environment whereby you might be near to people that have these drugs or whatever. Or alternatively, what it does is it puts you in a mindset whereby I'm anti-authority. I don't mind transgressing the rules or whatever. And all of a sudden, you're arrested or whatever, and that's hugely, hugely beneficial for the powers that be, because having a lot of people in prison means that, despite what they say about, these prisoners costing us blah, 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 they're not costing them anything. They're very, very beneficial. The prison industrial complex is a huge social control element, and it's there basically to maintain the status quo. And the benefits that people in states in America and counties in England or whatever get from having prisons in their region is ridiculous, absolutely ridiculous. The benefits that they get, it's a huge detriment to the people that actually live in that area. So there's all these various aspects of it. That it's very tricky. It's not as simple as all that. I think a lot of the problem is that certain people that are taken to be anti-authority heroes, like Timothy Leary, transpire to be CIA agents. I was recently watching Jan Erding on Gnostic Media talking about Terrence McKenna is connected to the CIA as well. So I don't know if that's true, but Howard Marks is seated at MI6. Through Ricky Ross connected to cocaine. I'm struggling to think of any drug guru. Kenneth Kesey was attached to MI6, Alan Watt, to MK Ultra, Alan Watt, Allen Ginsberg. They were all attached to MK Ultra. Only as much as they were doing experiments, but they were essentially the pinnacle of the promotion of this LSD. So I'm racking my brains to think of any so-called drug guru that hasn't got some sort of connection to intelligence agencies.
Yeah. I mean...
Pete Tosh, but then they murdered him.
Yeah. I mean, I was going to go back there and I would say to you that I interviewed Rick Simpson, and I think drugs are a double-edged sword.
Yeah, absolutely.
He's using it to help people and cure people in that sense, and you could abuse cannabis just like you can abuse any other substance. And
yeah, but...
And I really think that
it doesn't mean that it's a negative thing. Again, it's a substance. You can't have a go at the drug because. I think it absolutely. It's a very, very tricky one because, as I say, you've got people like Pete Tosh, Bob Marley, fabulous sort of beneficial things for marijuana. But again, here's another system of control, and especially you could pay for it, you could go to prison for it, etc., etc., etc. I'll use the Bill Hicks thing. I never robbed anybody, never raped anybody, never stole from anybody, never lost a single job, laughed my ass off and went about my day. But, it's a tricky one.
Yeah. And also what you were saying about the heroin, that, if it's pure and that it won't harm you. I think there was a drug czar that was advisor to one of our prime ministers.
Oh, Pete Nuts, wasn't it?
Pardon?
And he was talking about ecstasy and how basically he doesn't really feel that MDMA, again in its pure form, is any more dangerous. In fact, he thought that it was, of course, alcohol kills more people than crack, heroin and cocaine combined.
Yep.
And I believe the prescription pills kill more people than that.
Yeah, yep. Yep, for sure.
So, again, it's down to a perception, management technique, and a manufactured consent. The turn of the century, it was perfectly respectable for Gladstone, Prime Minister of Great Britain and Irish Territories, to pin up in Parliament, in the Houses of Parliament. It's fine. It's perfectly acceptable for Byron to be opiumed off his tits. Right? Do you know what I mean? It's fine for... It's glamorous when Sherlock Holmes is smoking crack. It's perfectly okay for Winston Churchill to take crack, which he did. He took cocaine lozenges, which were free-based cocaine lozenges, so all he was doing was sucking on crack.
Yep.
So, but it's a perception management technique. This it really very much depends on how you spin it, to be quite honest.
Yeah. I mean, you were talking about LSD earlier on. When I was a youngster, I got offered some LSD and I actually bought it, and I said, right, I'll take that for the time that I'm ready for it to take it. And I actually spoke to people that had taken LSD, and I had a very good friend who had taken it many, many times, in mushrooms and different things. Mm-hmm. And he said to me, I asked him, I said, what's the story? And he explained what happens and so on. And then he finally turned around and he said, if you want to look at the world in a different light, take that tablet. And he says, but afterwards, he says, you'll never see the world the same. And that's always stuck with me. Would that be something similar to what you've discovered?
Yeah, but again, it depends whether it's a sort of huge transcendental thing or whether it's just a sort of realization that, hang on, I've done this thing and I've not died. So somebody's lying to me somewhere. I mean, that's one of the things, like, that's very, very clever about drugs, is that's how they sort of tweak you into the use of it, is because basically they lie to you with the propaganda. This is your brain on drugs, you take this once, you're going to die. And then you find out that somebody that you really respect, either a musician or an older peer, or somebody like that who you take to be very intelligent, is trying these things, or has tried it or whatever, and that blows your mind. And so, but it's a very, very clever way of, marketing campaign. Again, it's an underground thing. It's something that you want to do. So with LSD and stuff like that, it's changing your perception, kind of. I think it's different for different folks. Again, Jan Irving talks about this concept of, like, the promoting it as this life-changing drug. And for some people it can be. But what he wonders is that promotion of the sort of psychedelic experiences is going to definitely be this. Is that a way to make people definitely sort of go in a specific position and a specific way? I mean, like, no, before anybody had taken acid or mescaline or any of these things, anybody in the sort of general public probably found out about it by reading Aldous Huxley's Doors of Perception or Marriage of Heaven and Hell, which talks about a good trip or a bad trip and stuff like that. So you've got a preconceived notion in your head what it possibly could be like anyway. So it's one of those things, if you took it in a vacuum, would it, completely distinct from any sort of preconceived notion of what it might be like, would that change it? Does the certain things that you see depend on what you expect to see? Like, or is it a marked experience, an effect that will happen again and again and again to the same people? Again, I'm of the opinion of each their own. Try these things and do it, but don't take anything as like, this is going to change my life, because anything like that, you put too much stock in it. That's how religions work, and that's how cults work, and that's how anything works. And you can have the cult of drugs. Again, nothing against drugs per se, but you can be drawn into this thing where you think this is the be-all and end-all, this is the raison d'etre, and this is going to define me. And when the second you start getting too many external things defining you, it's exactly the same psychological process as beating your ego down by a pimp. Your superego, or the external influences of the wider social construct, are more powerful than your self-determination. And so again, it's a very, very tricky thing. I'd say if people want to try it. Go nuts. Like, do what you want. But I'm just very wary again that the people that are promoting it as a specifically life-changing event, Timothy Leary, possibly Terence McKenna, these people, like, they're not all that they seem to be. Aldous Huxley, they're not all that they seem to be. Aldous Huxley was specifically involved in social control, and the whole point of the LSD movement could be comparable to the concept of Soma in Brave New World. And again, I'm very worried that a lot of people will be going, oh, bloody hell, he's having a go at the LSD and turning off in droves and stuff like that. Not having a go at the LSD, not having a go at any drugs, not having a go at hypnotism when I'm talking about MK Ultra. These are all tools. These are all social constructs and things that can be used. And like anything, you get a collection of bricks, you put it together, you can make a wonderful place to live. You get a collection of bricks and you drop it on somebody, you kill them. So you can't, it's not as specific as is this good, is this bad. It's how did that experience affect you? where did you get your preconceived notions about this? And what has it done to you? I've seen many people, and I know many people that have been incredibly positively affected by LSD. I've seen a couple of people that have been totally burnt out by it.
Yeah.
So, again, I think different strokes for different folks. And I don't think some people are ready for certain drugs. And I don't think some people should do certain drugs. Certainly don't think idiots with aggressive tendencies should be doing proportions like cocaine and stuff like that. Of course it's going to end badly, right? Do you know what I mean? But I don't think certain people who I don't think LSD is for everybody. You can end up, if you're not in a secure place, you can end up very damaged by it.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
But again, each to their own.
Yeah, well, that's what happened with me. Eventually, I decided that I liked the way that I looked at the world, even though at that time it was wrong. I didn't take it, but
But that's the thing. You're not a revolutionary because you've taken a tab of acid. That's the other thing. That like the sort of peer pressure and this sort of social construct thing. You could be a revolutionary, and it could impose some fabulous thoughts out of you. But just doing that on its own does not mean that you're, striking out at the powers that be. And it doesn't mean that that's going to turn you into the person that you've always wanted to be.
I really think that it was very important what you said there. It depends what your emotional state is to begin with, and what you perceive that drug to benefit you or whatever it is.
I keep quoting Bill Hicks, but he says like, I took acid and then I went to this theme park, I went on a roller coaster and I had a real bad time. It's because you're a dickhead. Of course you're going to have a bad time. But don't blame the drug. Don't ruin it for everybody else just because you don't know what the bloody hell you're doing. But again, this is the point. You take half a bottle of Night Nurse and it's going to end up bad.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? It's it's about personal responsibility. Now, I'm of the opinion of all adults, if I want to put anything into my body, even if it kills me, it's nobody's business but me.
Yeah.
Right? So, that's it. I don't go for these systems to control you're bad instantly because you do this. Like, a heroin user is instantly a junkie, etc., etc., etc. I don't go for that. I'm not stupid. I'm not naive. I understand the social and physical detriments that all these things can do to people. But you've got to live in a sort of reality of live and let live, because all your opinions of other people, these guys, the dropouts, the deadheads, the lettuce eaters, the hippies, the whatever, it's informed from other people who may well have got an agenda to put that. I mean, that's specific with the hippies, was the point that it was teaching the kids that they were revolting against their parents, and it was teaching their parents that their kids were revolting. And so it's a double-edged sword, because basically the kids think that they're actually off doing some, affecting some sort of change, and all that they're doing is demonising themselves in the eyes of everybody else. And so it's win-win for the powers that be.
Yeah. I use that phrase often, double-edged sword. 9 times out of 10 the powers that be basically have both directions covered. I'm not sure if you're of the opinion that I personally believe that everything's controlled, or the vast bulk of things. The USA, Russia thing, it's the same people. It's I live in Northern Ireland, the IRA and UFF, both sides are controlled. The Jew Arab thing, both sides are controlled.
I tend to think so, because you can't really have an intelligence agency unless you've got a justification for it. Do you know what I mean? So, you could make the argument that the IRA are the best thing for British intelligence in Ireland, because if there wasn't a hostile force fighting against them, what on earth would they do?
Yep.
And how would they justify themselves being there? And people would start to have to look at social control and things like that. And okay, fair enough, we're here now. Let's start making it nice. Or, you're in control now. Get off your arse and do something. But we can't do that, I'm afraid, because there's this hostile force that we need to fight. And I don't know that, but I'm just postulating that in all these, just like you say, you own both horses, you're going to win the race.
Yeah. I mean, we were speaking about the IRA there, and the British forces and the UFF and so on, which is the faction on the opposite side of the IRA for people who don't know. But I spoke about the Omagh bombing, that I'd done some research and found out it was MI6 or British services that had essentially planted that bomb. And I was speaking
I think a lot of the work, I think the majority is any sort of like, of these so-called IRA bombing campaigns that affected mainland Britain. I think it's something horrendous, like 90% of them were actually carried out by intelligence agencies.
Yeah.
Now, whether that was justified as these were deeply implanted people that just could not back out at the last minute, I don't believe that. But whether that is the way that it's portrayed or not, I'm not entirely sure. But, this is often the case. I mean, Christ, the first World Trade bombing, it's in like 1994 or whatever, Salam, I think his name was, like, he basically recorded the FBI say, like, this is a training exercise, yeah? Yeah, it's a training exercise. Well, why are you giving me a real bomb? Why don't you just blow up the World Trade Center? Don't you worry about that, Salam, it's alright. Yeah. And so what happened was he went against his orders and parked the truck that contained the explosives away from one of the columns, and so it didn't actually do as much damage as it would have done. And this is exposed, this has been on the media, this is like, Christ, the Star David Hotel, one of the first exposed false flag events, like, where Mossad agents basically dressed as Arabs and went in and shot a load of Jewish civilians, basically to garner hatred for Arabs. It's perception management techniques. It's different sort of methods of getting people to hate and to channel any energy in a specific direction. And it's sleight of hand technique. It's like, it's totally a sleight of hand. It's like a magician. It's totally like a magician, basically. An interesting thing, did you know that Houdini was a CIA agent?
I didn't know, no.
Yeah, so when he was in his box, he's in there, he's trying to escape. He wasn't. He was off doing missions.
Right, okay.
Yeah, I know. It's crazy, isn't it? There's another famous musician that he basically taught sleight of hand techniques to the CIA so that they could, put surreptitiously LSD into people's drinks and stuff like that. And the guy that invented, Blind Date, I can't remember his name, is, the film's called Confessions of a Dangerous Mind. Mm-hmm. When he was doing Blind Date in America, they go on the holiday, the couple. When he was taking the couple on the holiday as a chaperone, he was nipping off for half an hour, assassinating somebody and coming back.
Well, I'm laughing, that's not good.
Well, again, the connections with the entertainment industry, because he's perfect, because nobody would assume it at all. Of course he's not. He's an entertainer. Bob Hope, for crying out loud. Again, depends whether you believe this or not, but Bryce Taylor claims that Bryce Taylor was a confessed mind control subject. She was what's known as a presidential model under a project called Monarch, which blonde-haired, blue-eyed girls that essentially traumatized into being sex objects, completely malleable, do what you want, prostitutes for the elite. And, she particularly catered towards people like Ronald Reagan and Henry Kissinger, and stuff like that. And Bob Hope was, apparently her handler. And in her book, Thanks for the Memory, she basically explains that Bob Hope's, this is plausible because Bob Hope did not write any of his jokes. He was merely a performer of the jokes. And he would go to a lot of military bases and do like GI shows and stuff like that, USO shows, and build up morale and all that sort of malark. Mm-hmm. And apparently this was a cover for his espionage activities. And again, you can totally believe it when you find out that like Death Row Records, the promotion of the concept of black young men as dangerous gangsters. Again, double-edged sword. Because you tell black kids that enough time that this is the only thing that you're going to ever achieve in your life. This is what the white world thinks of you. This is what the rest of America thinks of you. They think of you as a thug and a menace. Then you go, well, sod you then. If I'm a menace, I'm going to show you a menace. Yeah. Okay? I know exactly how to do it because I've been listening to Snoop Dogg. I've got to get a 6'4" and a 4'5" and a 40 and various other numbers that I'm not entirely sure what they mean at this precise moment. And so, it informs your lifestyle options. And then at the same time, again, they're the ones that are actually bringing in the drugs through sort of Medellin and through Freeway Ricky Ross. They're the ones that are promoting this gangster lifestyle. It's connected with the media because at the same time you've got films like Boys in the Hood. You've got films like Menace to Society, which, I don't care what anyone says, serves to glamorise the lifestyle. You've got films like Scarface, that basically inform people, like, so long as you don't watch the last 5 minutes, this is, be a drug kingpin, because you're going to make a lot of money, and you're going to end up with Michelle Pfeiffer.
Yeah. Neil, we've been on here for about 2 hours nearly. Would you like to take a short comfort break and come back and we'll maybe touch more on a little bit more of the Bryce Wilson stuff and
Yeah, certainly. Yeah, so let me just go and nip to the old water closet and that, and I'll be back.
Well, we'll be probably 8 minutes, something like that. If that suits you.
Smashing. Do you want to phone me back, or?
No, it's okay. It's not a terrible
moment. I've been thinking, Steve, like, the NSA are going to go mental listening to this content. There's going to be about 20 people sat around at the NSA at Echelon and places like that, but who listening to what these guys are talking to over the phone? My God! Like, red flags and buttons everywhere. If we keep going, we might be able to blow up their computer server.
Well, let's hope so. Welcome back to Awake Radio, folks, and WeRoar Radio. I have my guest, Neil Saunders, here. And full of information. I'm loving having him on the show. Welcome back, Neil.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
Okay, well, we're touching on the MK Ultra, Bryce Wilson stuff, and Bob Hope and so on. Would you like to go into a little bit more, because I know that she has a film, It's the Most Dangerous Game, and certainly in that it shows you some evidence of her being cut up inside and a face carved on her womb. Which sounds very, very horrific. Would you like to go into some of that kind of stuff?
Well, I mean, there's two of the sort of what Bryce Taylor was involved in. Essentially, was a project called Monarch. Bryce Taylor was involved with Ted Gunderson. Ted Gunderson was the ex-head of the FBI, and I had the pleasure of interviewing him once. And basically, he claimed that Monarch was now called Marathon. Monarch's one of these sort of fabled projects. It's for sex slaves for entrapment purposes, for pleasure purposes, blackmail purposes, and various sort of espionage things. Also, they can be used because of the traumatic experiences. They develop a photographic memory, and so they can, have a look at a document once, go back, tell Henry Kissinger or whoever it is exactly what the Russians have got in their file. Now, the thing about Monarch is that it was actually, a lot of people dismiss it as complete and utter fabrication. William Colby, the former head of CIA, actually tacitly admitted to its existence. Basically, he was asked, I forget the name of the journalist, stood up and said, "What about Monarch? He's still continuing Monarch?" And he looked at him, daggers, like, absolute, like, you don't mention that. And he was forced into an answer, and he says, "We've stopped doing that. We haven't done that since the late 70s. So he tacitly admitted that Monarch as a program existed. The books that people may have read about Monarch, before I come on to Bryce Taylor and Cathy O'Brien, are the Cisco Wheeler and Fritz Springmeier books. The Candy James book, she was apparently a model that was used for this type of thing. I think she was a radio host. The truthfulness of that particular story is debated. I don't know enough about it other than the present fact to tell you whether it's true or not. Fritz Springmeier wrote sort of how to create a totally undetectable mind-controlled slave, and bloodlines with the Illuminati and such like that. Fritz Springmeier, a lot of the stuff that he says, he seems quite fantastical. A lot of what he has said has been quite predictive, basically. Essentially, it's easy to dismiss a lot of what Fritz Springmeier says offhand, because basically it sounds crazy, and there's no what you'd call facts or solid proof or anything like this. It's a lot of hearsay and conjecture and stuff like that, but it is consistent hearsay and conjecture. It is consistent witness sort of stories, and the things that he was talking about a long time ago alpha programming, beta programming, kitten programming, the use of monarch butterflies, the use of certain symbolism like animal prints and things like that. That is tending to sort of pop up more and more now. There are a lot of things sort of as credence to Fritz Springmeier, who was seemingly framed for some spurious bank robbery that he was clearly not involved with, but he was thrown in prison. So a lot of people tend to look at that as sort of a validation that he was causing, ruffling a few feathers and stuff like that. Worth a look, totally worth a look. I think he's a very, very admirable person. I think that, he himself is, I thought he's very, very meaningful. The only thing with that is that it's easy for outsiders to dismiss it because it sounds so very crazy. Doesn't mean it's not true. I think that 90% of it is accurate. So the other two were Kathy O'Brien and Bryce Taylor. Bryce Taylor we spoke about previously before. She was owned by Henry Kissinger, and her handler was Bob Hope, and she slept with Ronald Reagan, and she did a couple of books, Thanks for the Memories and Starshine, which essentially tell her story. She recovered her memories because she went through a car window, and apparently the trauma sort of dislodged these memories, so to speak. The other woman that is famous in the monarch realm is Kathy O'Brien. Now, she speaks about Clinton and Dick Cheney. I think she's the one that you're speaking about. She had a witch's face carved into her vagina.
That's it, yeah.
And both of them are with stun guns, and they've got evidence of this and stuff like that all over their body. And they tell the same sort of story. The dangerous game aspect of it is when basically she's taken with, in the book, which is for reasons of national security, she's taken with Dick Cheney and Bill Clinton, and what they do is there's a series of mind control soldiers with them, and they get a couple of them to jump out of the helicopter to their death just for their own personal amusement, and then they organise the hunting of humans. That's what the most dangerous game is. Like they actually arrange for some of these people to be hunted down and killed. And a lot of this sort of time, this is apparently a technique that is used to induce trauma in these children and stuff like that. Make them feel like they're being hunted and such like that. One of the most sort of prominent suggestions that these two women are telling the truth, aside from the sort of physical evidence, the scars and such like that, and the fact that their story is unchanging and consistent, and they seem to have certain pieces of documentary evidence that back up certainly where they were at the time and who they might have been with and such like that. The other thing is that basically these they're very litigious people that they talk about. Like Kathy O'Brien talks about Dick Cheney breaking her jaw during oral sex, and Bill Clinton being a massive cocaine fiend, and Hillary Clinton being a lesbian, and stuff like that. And nobody was sued. Whether that's a sort of double bluff, who knows? But that is seen as a sort of like, they don't want to open this can of worms because then basically will come out. Like, the Clintons are weird people. The Clintons were involved in bringing huge amounts of cocaine in through Mena, Arkansas, during the Iran-Contra. They basically then skimmed the money off the top of that and used it in what's known as the Whitewater scandals to make even more money with illegal real estate deals and stuff like that. During the investigation into that particular thing, it never really happened because 57 material witnesses died in mysterious circumstances. 4 of the people that died were the Clintons' personal bodyguards, and they were the only 4 people from the ATF that were killed during the siege of Waco. So, very, very strange. The monarch aspect of it comes from the concept that basically they traumatise children at a very young age and then put them through sort of paedophilic sex tapes, satanic ritual abuse to traumatise them, and through the sort of use of trauma, they dissociate the mind and cause amnesic barriers and create what's called alters in the brain. Essentially, they split the personality because the trauma is too great to deal with. It's now called dissociated identity disorder, and it's a proven fact. Colin Ross Institute deals with this on a daily basis, and he's in the back of the DSM-4. Colin Ross is fabulous. Colin Ross is one of the best sort of best researchers on mind control out there. Jim Keith is also brilliant, although dead. Dave McGowan is also fantastic. Bruce Schlain and Martin Lee are also fabulous. Alex Constantine. All of their books should be bought by everybody. The Franklin case, I mean, there's numerous cases that sort of go back to this concept of using children that are provable. The Presidio case, Michael Aquino. Michael Aquino is the highest-ranking soldier in the NSA. He's also the leader of the Templar Set. It's an offshoot from the Church of Satan because he felt the Church of Satan just wasn't quite satanic enough for him. And so he went off and formed this associate group. Now, in the Presidio case, what happened was basically there's a daycare centre there, like a kindergarten or whatever, and numerous children were coming down with chlamydia and, rectal damage, vaginal damage, all this sort of stuff. And I know that America is a very progressive country, but 5-year-olds don't catch chlamydia, you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And they said that there was a chap called Mr. Gary, who was the teacher who was forcing them to do poo-poo games and stuff like that, which is essentially covering them in feces and making them drink blood and stuff like this. And all the children said that basically, two guys called Mikey and Shambi, who turned out to be Michael Aquino and his wife Lilith, were also heavily involved in this sexual abuse system, and that they were taken to specific areas and made to kill other children, kill animals, and take part in sexual orgies. Now, there's a woman whose name escapes me, I think it's Linda Goldstone, or I could be wrong. She basically thought she was a skeptic, so she investigated this and discovered that on the actual Presidio, there's dedicated satanic worship temples all over the actual base. Now, Satanism is a recognized religion within the American military, and you can get, places of worship for it. Again, not having to go at Satanism per se, but, when you're killing kids and having sex with children and stuff like that, you've gone down the wrong path somewhat. Yeah. But again, this is not an isolated case. There's the Franklin case, there's the McMartin preschool trial case, which is essentially exactly the same thing. These kids were saying that they were taken by tunnels that went underneath the school to perform satanic rituals and stuff like this, and sexual orgies. And this was thrown out of court, but it has been proven without a shadow of a doubt that these tunnels did exist, and that the children were actually telling the truth. And again, this is where the false memory syndrome foundation comes in, because they basically swept in and went, no, this doesn't happen, and disavowed a lot of the evidence, but it's absolutely 100% provable that this happened. The Franklin Saving and Loan scandal is a very similar incident. Basically, Paul Benassi and, what's the name, Angela Owens? I can't remember. There was a series of children that basically, what was happening was this Republican senator called Lawrence King was using his influence and prostituting these children out through Boys Town, which is a charitable organisation, whilst skimming millions of dollars from the Nebraska Franklin Savings and Loans investment agency, and these children were being used for sexual exploitation. One of these kids was Paul Benassi. Paul Benassi was vindicated in court. He charged by 114 separate personalities induced by MKUltra-style programming through the American government. He was involved in a ritual murder at Bohemian Grove. He was involved in many, many child sex incidents, satanic rituals. His principal job was to walk into playgrounds with pockets full of cash and sweets and lure children that had been previously picked by the CIA or whoever, take them round the corner, where they'd be bundled into a van. One of the people that he specifically did this to was Johnny Gosch. Johnny Gosch is a very famous case where it was a paperboy that went missing and later turned up on Russian paedophile sites. Paul Benassi testified that he was specifically chosen by none other than Michael Aquino, highest-ranking military officer in the NSA, connected to the Presidio sex scandal, and leader of the Templar Set. He also wrote the Mind War papers, which talk about psychotronically killing people with ionizing radiation from a distance and stuff like that. So he's very high up in the mind control and soft kill, silent kill, slow kill weaponry milieu, so to speak. And again, this goes on and on and on. The Mark Dutroux case showed prominent paedophiles, within the Belgian government, and snuff tapes being made. You look at Charles Ingham and Leonard Lake, they were making snuff films for somebody connected to the government. They were all ex-MK Ultra people. The Son of Sam case, that was all around Bill Mentor and Robert Evans selling snuff films to Roy Radin. That's the producers from Hollywood, by the way. What else? The Finders, people, if they just go and Google the Finders was a CIA organization that was taking children and transporting them across the border to Mexico to be used for pornographic films. God, what else is there? The Hand of Death cult. The Hand of Death was, that was connected to, Henry Lee Lucas and Otis Toole, cannibals who killed 600 people between them. They were transporting children with the heft of military-connected, high-ranking criminal organizations to Mexico, to places like the Matamoros, which is connected to people like Adolfo Constanzo, who was connected to military intelligence and was running a Palo Mayombe cult that basically sacrificed human beings, connected to the drug trade in Mexico. You want to go closer to home? Jeffrey Epstein. Jeffrey Epstein is a billionaire. He's a friend of Prince Andrew, and he's a convicted paedophile. And the girl called Virginia Andrews came out a couple of years ago and basically said that she, aged 14, was prostituted by this guy to very prominent members of society, helped by Ghislaine Maxwell, who was Robert Maxwell's daughter. There was elements of mind control, elements of torture, elements of drug use, and in all cases, she was used to basically extort and blackmail people by having sex whilst underage with these celebrities and dignitaries and foreign diplomats and people like this in Jeffrey Epstein's house, which was wired for sound and recording. Mm. So again, it's the same thing, the use of children for coercive plots, and that's exactly what's happening in the Kincora boys' home, which was exposed by Ken Livingstone. That was used to, it wasn't exposed by Ken Livingstone, that makes him sound like a hero. He accidentally says, oh yeah, I know that they're using these boys to try and entrap the IRA, and unfortunately they just didn't do anything about it. What's the other one? Max Clifford has been instrumental in hiding, not Ken Clark, what's his name? Alan Clark was having sex with two 14-year-old girls. He was instrumental in hiding that. Sarah Smith was obviously buggering boys, and people were instrumental in hiding that. Various other politicians have been connected to Elm Street, including our very favourite eternally virginal Christmas #1 singer, who I won't name for fear of reprisals, but I think we can figure out who is. But yeah, do you see what I mean? So again, this connection. So it doesn't actually seem so implausible once you actually go through it and realise that intelligence agencies do use this sort of thing. And we've had very recent scandals and very provable scandals that again, time and time again, show essentially the same modus operandi: stealing children, traumatising them, selling them through satanic rituals. And it's connected to snuff films, it's connected to child pornography, and it's connected to espionage.
I forgot to say before, when we come back on here, if anybody has any questions, stick them in the awake chat there, and I'll certainly put them to Neil. Would you like to go into a little bit more of the British side of things there, and like sort of, names went clean out of my head. The DJ, Jimmy Savile, yeah. And
what's interesting about Jimmy Savile, and Alan Freeman, actually, although I'm not suggesting that Alan Freeman was involved in this, but what they were both in the pocket of was, the Cray brothers. Now, they were protected by them or whatever. Now, this is very interesting, again, when it comes down to sort of gangsterism and the entertainment industry. The mafia control the majority of the entertainment industry still in America, surreptitiously, through various influences and also through control of certain drugs and such like that. Right at the start, it was the mafia that controlled the jukebox wars you know, sort of who owns the jukeboxes, what goes in the jukeboxes, and later influenced the payola scandal, when basically the DJs were paid to promote certain other artists and such like that. Now, the craze, what's interesting about craze is they were caught basically running rent boys through the Houses of Lords.
Right.
I forget the lord that Rod had an affair with, but this came out essentially as they're running rent boys. Essentially, that's probably not going to make me that popular, but it's true.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Now, Jimmy Savile, what I believe is, I mean, it came out today that essentially the BBC were paying a lot of his expenses, to pay off these kids, that he was, treating these kids and then apparently luring them off. I think a lot of this is disinformation that's coming out. Were the BBC involved? Yes and no, right? It was an open secret, okay? I mean, Christ, Johnny Rotten basically said that he was a kiddie fiddler on an interview in the 80s, and that was banned. It's been an open secret that Jimmy Savile mucks about with kids for ages. Loads of people muck about with kids, but again, half of it is the blackmail thing, half of it is the entertainment industry, and some of it is just downright evilness, basically. Do you know what I mean? Like a power sort of trip against Cyril Smith and Jimmy Savile, connected to Elm House, connected to the Bryn Allen case and all this, and connected to satanic ritual as well. A lot of the people have come out, so actually they were doing rituals and stuff like that. And Haute Le Grand, connected to Haute Le Grand, as was Wilfred Bramble. Here's another one, right, because it gets me, I don't understand this, right, okay? Why is Gary Glitter and Jonathan King, you're not allowed to listen to any of their records anymore, but it's perfectly okay to listen to Bill Wyman and the Rolling Stones, perfectly okay to listen to, Great Balls of Fire. I can't remember his name.
Oh, yeah.
Jerry Lee Lewis, thank you. It's perfectly okay to listen to Elvis Presley, who married his Priscilla when she was 14. It's perfectly okay to listen to R. Kelly, who pissed on a girl who was 15 in a video and married Aaliyah when she was 15. Perfectly okay to listen to Jimmy Page, who was courting a 14-year-old girl. It's perfectly okay to watch steptoe on someone. Wilfred Bramble is approved abuser of boys at care homes. And yet, other certain people become persona non grata immediately. And so the connections are Haute Le Grand. The Jimmy Savile was there, and Wilfred Bramble was there. There was bones found there, and again, that was an incredible cover-up. And now that you're looking at, these forensic experts mistook these pieces of coconut for bones. I mean, come on.
Yeah.
Come on. Does anybody really believe that? Absolutely not. The bloke was basically pressured into, I imagine he was told, you shut up or you're dead, mate. We've killed enough kids here. Do you think one fat policeman's going to make a difference? Hell no, we'll suicide you. What we'll do, mate, I'll tell you what we'll do. We'll have you dead of a heart attack with a plastic bag on your head, masturbating in front of gay porn. How'd you like that? Would you like that, mate? And that's how they do you.
Yeah. Yeah.
They'll Robin Cook you. They'll throw you off a cliff. Anything you want, and they'll humiliate you. Like that guy, I forget his name. This is the power of it. I can't remember his name. The poor sod that was stabbed to death and then put in a bag and in his bath. And they put it about that, he was gay and he wasn't a cross-dresser and he was into S&M and he did kill himself and put himself in the bag. Of course he didn't. And none of those things are true. Yeah. But it doesn't matter because it serves to cloud the issue. Because nobody remembers the circumstances prior to his death. Everyone remembers the crazy nature of his death.
Yeah. One of the things that I was wanting to bring up was Dunblane as well. I knew that you had sent you something about Dunblane. And paedophilia and satanic abuse tend to run.
Yeah. I mean, basically, was it Thomas Hamilton? Hi, I think he was connected to the guy from NATO. I might have a note on it here actually. There's several things. I mean, basically, one of the things was that he was the injuries that he sustained that killed him weren't consistent with him shooting himself, and the suggestion was that something was done to basically cover up a high level paedophile. Then I can't remember for the life of me the people that he was connected to. Just trying to look if I've got it on a note here.
Mm.
I can't remember, but basically the suggestion was that it was used to A, hide a paedophile network, and B, obviously to sort of impose different sort of levels of security on school, like ban on handguns and the putting up of fences around schools and stuff like that. And essentially, he shouldn't have got his gun license. This guy should have been in prison a long, long time ago. And like, it was totally, completely wrong the way that it was set up. But I can't for the life of me remember the specific details of it off the top of my head, I'm afraid. But if people just Google Thomas Hamilton's connection to high-level Freemasons, the one thing that I can remember is that basically there was a paramedic that came out and said, look, all of these kids, I've treated all these kids previously for vaginal, rectal, that sort of injuries consistent with sexual abuse. And the other thing I can remember is that basically apparently shot himself once through the heart and once through the head with 2 different guns, and only one gun was found there.
Okay.
And yeah, it's been sealed for forever. It was some guy, some top level Freemason that he was connected to. If anyone can remember in the chat room, please put it up. And he was also connected to some guy that was a NATO diplomat, but I can't off the top of my head. But it stinks to high heaven. It absolutely stinks to high heaven. And it's another one of these things that's been totally covered up, and the evidence is just not consistent with what the public image is. One of the other things that I do remember is that Andy Murray was apparently there.
Yeah.
So, when he wasn't there, he was supposed to go to the hall where the children were shot, but for whatever reason wasn't.
Yeah, that was one of the questions I was going to ask you about. Andy Murray went to that school. He obviously just won Wimbledon there on the 7th of the 7th and so on. It's, I'm trying I think there's a guy...
I don't know if there's any connection, per se, or whether it's just a sort of coincidence, but I don't know, it's very, very strange. I mean, the thing that you can say about this is there's also a suggestion that there was definitely more than one gunman there as well, which is the same as Columbine, it's the same as Sandy Hook, it's the same as every single Virginia Tech. There's at least 3 gunmen there. I mean, Columbine, there's probably about 6 gunmen, which is crazy as well. Yeah. And of all the pieces of evidence that were found on the scene, not a one of them had a fingerprint that matched either of the suspects. Also, if you look at the way the 2 bodies are, and the way that the brain has landed on top of, I forget which is underneath each other, the guy shot himself in his left temple with his right hand, which is just insane. And his brains have ended up splattered across the guy's knees. Right, which proves that basically the guy was on the floor dead before he hit. So it's not a joint to his side. It looks almost as if someone walked up and shot them from behind.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, that's the other thing about Columbine, is just like this. That people, it was early on it was reported that there was mercury switches there. Like, the bombs, there's like 300 pieces of explosive material that were taken around. Like, about 20 of these bombs that weighed about 20 kilograms each. There was just no way that they could take all that equipment in.
Yeah.
On their own, and a lot of it was sophisticated to the level where basically the FBI were reporting on the scene. There's more people connected to this because this is highly sophisticated. This is military level equipment.
Mm-hmm. We have a question on the chat there. Any thoughts on Michael Hutchinson or David Carradine?
Yeah, they were murdered, both of them. Michael Hutchinson's thumbs were broken, so there's no way that he hung himself. I'll tell you that for a start. Why? I don't know. But again, how did he die? Masturbating. How embarrassing. Mm-hmm. It's a shame thing. And then what's the name died very shortly afterwards. You've got to be careful about here, but there's a certain charitable gentleman that looks like a Edwardian tramp that had a lot to gain by Michael Hutchinson and Paula Yates dying. Mm-hmm. And the particular charity that he's connected to, it's not as great a charity as it is. The suggestion is that that particular pop concert, the money that was raised for it, essentially went to areas that move people away from warlords. That sounds like a good thing, but it basically it moved any resistance away from the warlords, and so certain warlords were able to go into areas of that particular continent and this was politically and economically beneficial for certain governments. And the other suggestion that's been made is that more people died trying to get to the aid than actually died in the famine. But Michael Hutchinson was definitely murdered. David Caroline was also definitely murdered. That takes 4 seconds of looking at. His hands were handcuffed behind his neck, and he was hung. I'd like to see anybody hang themselves with their hands handcuffed like that. It's just impossible. And the door was shut.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like on the what's it called? The wardrobe. So yeah, both of them were murdered. Why they were murdered, by whom, I don't know.
Yeah. David Carradine was a strange one. He made some bad movies, but he was there was one that was about the Templars and things like that. So I don't know.
Well, apparently he was over there to investigate secret societies, but whether that's true or not.
Yeah. It's hearsay. It's difficult to verify, I suppose.
Yeah, but yeah, both of those were murdered, I believe.
Okay, I asked you a question in the break. It was about Unit 7. I know we're getting away from one thing and jumping to another. Unit 721 was a Chinese torture camp, if you like. Would you like
to... yeah. There's films been made about this too. There's the Empire... The Men Behind the Sun. I'm sorry, Steve, I'm into ridiculously obscure violent films.
Sure, yeah.
One's called The Men Behind the Sun, and one's called Philosophy of a Knife. Philosophy of a Knife is about 4 hours long. So, but it's quite good. These were essentially, they were experimentation centres. They were very much like the experimentation centres at Auschwitz, and they were connected with several things. I mean, a lot of it is coercive stuff, torture, and, that sort of thing. What we were saying, and we were chatting about on the break, is what's crazy about a lot of the Nazi experiments and stuff. They were taken up by people like the RNLI, the Royal National Lifeboat Institution, and the RAF, and the Navy, and stuff like that, because they were using the human guinea pigs to test things like hypothermia responses and pressure changes. There's a famous scene in Men Behind the Sun where they do an experiment. Basically, the guy he explodes, he prolapses out of somewhere where you don't want to prolapse out of. And but these were genuine experiments. And what's crazy about these things is that, you could make the argument that they were quite beneficial. I'm not saying that, but they're obviously used nowadays in therapeutic techniques. It's crazy, really. But yeah, these places did exist. But everywhere was doing terrible experiments. We were experimenting with people at Porton Down and Maresfield, experimenting on children at St Thomas's Hospital, experimenting on people in Birmingham Hospital and Burden Neurological Institute, and no government has got clean fingers, so to speak, have they? So I mean, that's not to justify it in any sense, but yeah, I mean, there are films out about those particular places now.
Well, I believe the Unit 721, that the Emperor, he was a 33rd degree Freemason, and he was...
I wouldn't surprise me. I mean, this is the thing that, people have asked me this before, how do you think the Chinese will combat, etc. Ben Fulford talks about their different factions of the Illuminati fighting, Illuminati, so to speak. It's a global governance thing. It's like all this East versus West versus communist versus capitalist. It's all for the tourists. It's it's to get people distracted.
Well, I believe the Emperor, he was basically null and void. Nothing was going to happen to him, and all the people that were involved with the experimentation weren't prosecuted at all. And
nobody that was really involved in the experimentation, and the Nazis were actually prosecuted. All the people that were, it was for show. And a lot of it's based on quite thin. Well, I'm not suggesting that it wasn't justified. I'm just suggesting that actually it was more of a showpiece than anything. Like certainly the board of IG Farben and Siemens got away with everything. Mm-hmm. Nobody from Standard Oil or AT&T was prosecuted. No one from Wall Street was prosecuted. No one from Brown Brothers Harriman was prosecuted. There's quite a select few that were, again, perception management, make the public feel like you've got people that you can put up as a figurehead and attack, and it's a vicarious thing. It's the whole point of celebrity, really, so that people can experience emotions vicariously, so that they don't get twitchy and want to experience them really. And this is why Facebook and things like this are brilliant social techniques of control, because they give you a lot of easy, mediocre pleasures. Do you know what I mean? You get that dopamine rush from the ingestion of information and stuff like that, but it's not a great one, but it's consistent and it's small. Like Facebook, for example. Mm-hmm. Sorry to go off on a tangent, but Facebook is based on a Skinner box. I mean, there's several things that's wrong with Facebook. For a start, basically, studies have proven that it makes people narcissistic, because essentially it's all about love me, love me, love me, respond to me, respond to me, respond to me. The second thing is that it actually makes people miserable. And this is proven. Like, people lie, and people put up the best photos. You know, you've all sat there and gone, right, I've got 7 photos of the same thing. I'll put up the 2 best ones where I look pretty on it, or whatever. And so people lie like that, so everyone else's life looks far more interesting than yours. So, you know, it causes incredible sort of anguish like that. But I'll take it further. I mean, basically, it's addictive like gambling, because basically, the important thing to understand is that social information is vital to your existence. This is why people like gossip, and this is why people like rumours and, you know, salacious bits of information and stuff like that. It's tied to natural instinctual urges. Like, if you can say there's an alpha male, if you can figure out a bit why he's the alpha male, then you can be a bit like the alpha male, and you might become the alpha male. More importantly, you won't die because you're not at the bottom of the rung, because you're taking this important social information and you're actually utilising it. Mm-hmm. In experiments, chimpanzees will put down food and pick up a photo of the alpha male of the chimpanzee, whatever they're called, tribe, flange, whatever they're called. Mm-hmm. So this is the thing, you can gain important stuff from social information. So your brain's wired to take in bits of information and reward you. So essentially you get a bit of gossip, you get a dopamine rush, you get a serotonin rush or whatever. And so when you go on Facebook and basically all that sort of stuff, it's kind of like a one-armed bandit. You're going on there and seeing if you've got anything nice that'll sort of pick you up, and you'll check again and check again and check again. And it's operant conditioning like a rat in a maze. Like, they learn that if you keep pressing the lever, you get food. Soon you remove the food and they still press the pellet because they've been operant conditioned to do that, and they get a response from it regardless of whether it was as good as the previous response. I take it a step further. You put down a bit of information, a status update or whatever on Facebook. It's kind of like gambling. It's kind of like gambling with your information. You're putting down big stakes. You might get a flurry of response from people who start a conversation, and people going, "Oh, that's very wise. You're very clever." Like, and, you know, bolster your ego. And then that's like winning big stakes. Or people might get cross with you, or you might get no response, in which case that's like, "Oh, I've bust," or whatever. And this is the problem. I'll take it a step further. You know, on Facebook, you basically, like we were saying earlier, you've got 7 photos of the same event. You basically choose the 2 best ones. Now, that's very, very subtle. That's very, very subtle. Okay, but what that tells you on a subconscious level, no matter how much you don't believe this, is that the edited version of you is slightly better than the real version, warts and all of you. Mm-hmm. And what you'll notice is that the Facebook version of you has got 1,000 people that they interact with or whatever. The real you's got 5. Yeah. And so what, again, that subtly tells you, and it's not true, but what that subtly programs into you is that the version of you on Facebook is better and more socially acceptable and more desirable than the real you. So you may start to alter the real you to be more like this honed version of you, which is kind of like the concept of celebrities, because basically nobody really knows a celebrity, everybody knows an idea of a celebrity, and again, they vicariously live through that. And what's crazy about social media for a start is the more time you spend on social media, less time you spend socially interacting with people. So it's an oxymoronical thing. Social media actually causes a distancing of people, and it's easy to talk to people through social media event, because basically you've got that separation. Have you ever heard the concept of like the Blair Witch Project? This might sound silly, right? Okay, the Blair Witch Project. The whole point of that is that she won't put the camera down. So why are you not putting the camera down? It's like, because it's not real. If I'm looking at it through a camera lens, I can disconnect myself. Same thing with journalists and stuff like that. Sometimes looking at it through a lens, they don't appreciate the enormity of what they're seeing until afterwards. Same thing with a television event as opposed to a real event. It's a distance, it's a way of psychologically separating yourself from the enormity of whatever is actually happening. So it's easier to do that because people are spiky and weird and they smell and they do strange things and they're not predictable. And so in these ways, these sort of elements of society are incredibly damaging for actual social interaction. I mean, I don't get Facebook because everyone's up in arms about like the NSA and stuff like this. But look, I can go on anyone's Facebook page and find a picture of them in bikini, date of birth, who they're going out with, what they've had for dinner in the last few months, blah blah blah, etc., etc., etc. If someone walks up in the street and asks for all those pieces of information, you quite rightly tend to get stuffed, because sharing that amount of information is deeply disturbing. It's not a natural act. It is something that we're being trained to do, and we're being trained to do it because we're being taught that to highlight certain aspects of yourself highlights what a brilliant person you are.
Yeah. I mean, that's back to the same thing, the double-edged sword, what you were saying, you go on Facebook and get your fix, that type of thing, and obviously...
By the way, I have a Facebook page, and if anyone would like to go on there and like it, I'd be very grateful.
That's how I contacted you, my friend, but I did say that...
well, that's the problem, isn't it? You know what I mean? Like, this is one thing I always try and highlight, because, like, I've been slagging off all these bands, and slagging off all this television, and slagging all this stuff. Like, I'm not here to say don't watch it. I'm not here to say don't listen to it. Like, it's none of my business what anybody else does, and I wouldn't dream of telling people don't do that. If you like Justin Bieber, that's fine. Well, it's not, but whatever keeps you happy. Right? Like, that's absolutely fine. Like, it's none of my business. I'm not here to be a cult leader. I'm not here to tell you what to do. It's just saying, look, have a look at all these things. I like total rubbish. I like all sorts of genres of music, and occasionally like something that's just stupid and pointless and silly. Like, occasionally I'll have a McDonald's. You know what I mean? Like, it's fine. It's not a problem. These things exist. You're not going to destroy the entire world. I don't want to go and live in a tent. Like, I really don't. Okay? But just be aware. Don't let anyone piss on your back and tell you it's raining.
Yeah. Well, I mean, yeah, that's exactly what you're saying. Is put the information out there and let people discern for themselves. And we all have to be part of this construct in some way, shape, or form.
Yeah. I mean, I think so. I mean, yeah, definitely. I mean, I think a lot of it has to do with a personal thing, because, as I say, it's perhaps not for everybody. You know, a lot of people find an incredible amount of comfort in these mechanisms of society, which is exactly why they work. And it can be very wrenching for people to be sort of dragged away from it, or to be shown the cracks. Do you know what I mean? Behind the facade, the chap behind the curtain or whatever. And a lot of people just don't want to be shown that, because why would they? It's not, as far as they can see, it's not affecting them. And again, so long as they're not affecting me by basically telling me what I can do, they want to do that, that's absolutely fine. If you want to sit in a fog, that's absolutely fine. If you want to take whatever you want to take and load it, again, I don't care what you want to do. Like, it's just important that people understand these sort of things so that they have an option.
Yeah. We're coming up into the last 15 minutes of the show. I would like to sort of ask you, where do you see this going in the future? We spoke about Brave New World and so on with Aldous Huxley. And where do you see it going, or what can we do about where we're going?
Well, it's kind of like this sort of, it's becoming more pervasive. It's like the sort of thing with the J.K. Rowling incident, 50 Shades of Grey. Banksy's another one. Like, people really think he's a rebel and blah, blah, blah. No one seems to understand that. Nobody knew who Banksy was. How could he become a millionaire? How can we sell all these stuff to Saatchi and Saatchi? Again, it's a construct, and that is becoming more prevalent. This sort of manufacture of events like X Factor and reality TV and such like that. I'm going to let people know a secret. Okay, they know who's going to win before the competition started. That's a fact. I don't care. You can argue with me all day. I know how television's made. You can't have a 12-week run of a show or whatever without having at least some concept of how this is going to run. Okay, you'll set your characters. You can't do it on the hop. You have to have had it set up and planned and screenplayed and narratives drawn and characters and what happens if the public react like this and what can we do to counter that and contingency measures and stuff like that. Like reality TV and stuff like that. It's all a construct. You can take, give me 20 minutes of material, I'll give you 3 separate narratives that are all completely plausible.
Mm-hmm.
Like that's editing 101. Like you can do that, like easy. Like absolutely easily by cropping an image, like just to give people an example. Like somebody shouting at a KKK member, say, okay, that seems like a very plausible image. You crop the KK member out of it and just look at this vile hippie protester, angry at the state, all of a sudden it changes your perceptions and stuff like that. And it's the same thing with the construction of news, the constructions of stories, constructions of events, like false flag events and stuff like that. People need to get more savvy. Like, the powers that be are aware that people are getting more savvy, and so they're putting red herrings and stuff out there, and, you know, controlled opposition and things like that.
Yep.
And so you just got to examine a lot of information and basically don't draw any conclusions. Don't go, this is what's happened, and then prove it. Try and figure out what's going off in the situation first and stuff like that. And just be aware that the media is not your friend. Right? They're there to sell you stuff, and if you needed it, they would need to sell it to you. Okay, and that goes for films. They're selling your lifestyle. They're selling your aspirational ideologies, and they're selling you all these different things, and just be aware of it. Like, nothing's as simple as just like, it's an entertainment piece or whatever. Like, particularly in Hollywood today, like, the amount of, like, cross-marketing and product placement, it's embarrassing watching some of the things now. But it's become so entrenched that you don't realise that, you know, entire, the Transformers, Transformers, like, a lot of people love that cartoon.
Mm-hmm.
The cartoon was made because they had a line of toys.
Yeah.
It was a promotional thing for the toys, not necessarily a bad thing, but just be aware of that. That's why they all died in the movie, because they had to, like, well, everyone's bought the toys now. What we do? We'll kill off Optimus Prime. I mean, you know, we'll traumatise children up and down, but then they'll have to go out and buy, I forget what his name was. He was a truck, a bigger truck.
Mm-hmm.
But anyway, they'll have to go out and buy him instead.
Yeah. How do you see this? I mean, I see this is very, very smart, very clever. The powers that be have got a lot of things worked out.
Yep.
Where would you say that we can go to combat this? I mean, I tend to use the 180-degree principle. If they point me in that direction, you know, Kim Kardashian, if you don't give a shit about Kim Kardashian, she doesn't affect your day. Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? Like, if you realise the dread that they are and stuff like that, again, start sounding like elitist. Sorry.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? But, like, you can't, because we're immersed in this culture. Like, do you know what I mean? We're like, you know, we're trapped in it, and they put millions and millions and millions of pounds into sort of sustaining it. And one of the things is the fact that they have to put all this power into sustaining this false construct of consumerism. They have to keep reinforcing it, because if they don't, you go, oh, actually, I don't need that. So that's one good thing. But again, I don't know, and the only thing that you can sort of start to do is start to realise that, so, one thing you can do that's not too sort of damaging is realise that certain trinkets are pointless, okay?
Mm-hmm.
Like diamonds, for example. A diamond is worth nothing. Seriously, it's worth nothing.
Mm.
They're not a rare commodity by any stretch of the imagination. It's to do with the 90% monopoly of De Beers and their sort of sales techniques and certain things like that. Even De Beers will tell you that the diamond has no value other than that which you put on it.
Yep.
So, once you couldn't do without those particular status symbols. And again, I'm not knocking anybody. If you want to have nice things, have nice things. Nice things are nice. That's why people like them. Mm-hmm. But certain nice things are pointless. And it goes too far. Like, I'll give you an example, right? Okay. iPhones. I mean, there's one thing, like, everyone, like, again, these are one things that are supposed to, like, reduce stress and make your business day more simple and easygoing and whatnot. Because of, like, the constant updates and blah, 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 and aside from the social status of it and all that psychological pressure, they cause immense amounts of stress. Just owning an iPhone causes an immense amount of stress on people. Do you ever get the phantom buzz?
I don't know. I don't have an iPhone, so.
Oh, well, like, people get this thing called a phantom buzz where it's like, oh, did my phone just go off? And that's because your brain, that's like jonesing for smack almost. You know what I mean? Like, you know, when you, like, that's your brain going, I haven't had a hit of dopamine in so long, you know, I'm going to start getting irritated if you don't start to actually provide me with some dopamine. It gets slightly worse than that. Like, studies, I think it was done at Harvard, I forget, it's in my second book, which is available at my website, by the way. Basically, people would do, like, let's see how addictive phones are, smartphones are. And yes, there's the gambling thing, the social thing that I was saying before. There's certainly that, but it's worse than that. When you're shown a photo of an iPhone, or even just played a ringtone, Blue's got specific, like, ringtone that is, you know, specifically for iTunes. When iPhone owners were shown this in laboratory experiments, the synaptic responses in their brain, they weren't just dopamine, serotonin and stuff like that. The person is in love with the phone. Chemically, the person, because of the ideology behind it, because of the status that they feel that the marketing has bestowed upon them, and because of the social interaction aspects, and et cetera, people are genuinely in love, chemically and provably in love with their iPhones. It's frightening. It's absolutely frightening. And you see kids and stuff like that as well. You know, you used to be, the problem was, like, don't smoke in front of your kids because basically they'll start smoking pencils and stuff like that. Mm-hmm. Babies, if you give them a piece of paper, the first thing that a lot of babies will do now is they'll wipe the finger across it as if it's an iPhone to try and open it. Mm. And do you know, like, how glamorous iPhones really are? Do you know that the iPhone factory has initiated a policy because their working conditions are so harsh and so unfair that they used to get about 7 suicides a week at their factory because it's essentially slave labour. And I don't mean, like, you know, slave labour like in England, slave labour. I mean slave labour like in the colonies used to be slave labour. And they've now initiated a policy whereby if you work for the iPhone company and you commit suicide because of the oppressive nature of the working conditions, your family will be fined, and if they cannot pay that fine, they will be thrown in prison.
Yeah.
So enjoy your iPhone, everybody.
Yeah.
Like, if anybody takes wearing Nike clothes, Converse clothes, if you've got an iPhone in your pocket, if you go to the Gap, you tacitly support slavery. I'm sorry to be an arsehole, but it's true. Like, you know, it is true, and this is the thing, that's the point that people have got to get over, is these constructs, they're glamorous, they are merely constructs.
Yeah.
And then the reality behind them is horrific.
Yeah. I mean, what you were just saying there, it really does strike home, that we keep the construct going by supporting it, essentially. So if you keep buying these iPhones or the clothes or whatever, then you support that slavery.
Yeah, and again, it's not people's fault.
Yeah.
You know, they're spending millions of pounds to convince people of these things.
Yeah.
Okay, and you know, they are good products, otherwise people wouldn't have them and stuff like that. So again, I'm not trying to doubt people, just saying that this is the facts behind, I guess it's the, you know, take off the emerald glasses, and you'll notice, oh, it's not made of emeralds, is it? It's a bit of plastic, but how many, you know, diamonds, you know, how many people have died so that they can get you those earrings? And again, the whole concept of diamonds, again, bolstered by advertising by NWA, as this concept of the diamond is forever, this concept of a diamond eternity ring, an engagement ring that was invented by NWA. And the bigger the diamond, the more you love the person. Obviously, that was invented by De Beers. That's also in my book.
Yeah, that's it. We're coming up to about 4 minutes towards the end, my friend. Do you want to give your books a plug again and your website? I don't mind that at all.
No, thank you very much. Well, my website is neilsandersmindcontrol.com. I'm also on Facebook under Neil Sanders, so if anybody wants to go on there, that's fine. If anyone wants to send me any emails, any questions, I'll be happy to answer. Yeah, I'm offline at the minute. I should be back in the next couple of days. There's also videos on there, other radio interviews that I've done, live shows, and a few YouTube videos and stuff like that. And if anybody wants my books, they're available either from davidike.com, from his bookstore, from richplanet.net, which is Richard Hall's website. Everybody should watch Rich Planet as well, which is on Showcase. And they're also available from my website. And my books are Your Thoughts Are Not Your Own, Mind Control, Mass Manipulation and Perception Management, Volumes 1 and 2, and Volume 2 is called Movies, Music and Marketing, and they basically discuss the whole sort of gamut of mind control, the history of it, the doctors involved, the various techniques, the social control experiments, the use of drugs, the use of the entertainment industry, the use of the news media, and the use of serial killers, and the use of music to channel youth energy. So if anyone's interested, please take a look.
Excellent. Excellent. Well, I've loved having you on the show, Neil. I really have. I would love for you to come back in maybe 6 months or so. Would you be happy to do that?
Don't have to wait that long, mate. I'm free whenever. It was an absolute pleasure, and so I'd be delighted to come back.
Well, that would be absolutely fantastic. As I say, you were part of my learning curve. The Northeast Truth Show I thought was brilliant.
Thank you very much.
I thoroughly enjoyed listening to you guys. It was really up to date, and you know, we can get into this conspiratorial view, but you know, you put it over in a way that was just the plain and ordinary man could understand and can see where it was going. So I thank you for that. I really do.
No, thank you. Thank you. It's very, very kind of you to say so.
Yeah. Well, as I say, we've got 2 minutes to 8 until we get chopped off and we roar. We're on Awake Radio that we can run over, but we roar we'll finish it definitely at 12. So thank you very much once again, Neil, and I really appreciate you coming on. And
no, thank you. Because I'm very flattered that you asked me, and it was a pleasure to do it.
Well, we'll be talking soon, for sure.
Okay.
I'll just wrap up the show here, my friend, and I'll get a wee chat in a wee second for you, if you like.
Okay, nice one, mate.
Okay, thanks a lot for listening in, guys. It's a real pleasure to have you listening. It was a real pleasure to have Neil on. And once again, I keep saying it's always appreciated of you tuning in every Monday. I never expect people to tune in to hear me, but they're good at to tune in for the guests.